Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere dark, damp and just a little bit stinky. We're heading back to the Middle Ages to live the high life of a medieval knight. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. I know, knights look awesome in movies, gliding through battles with flowing capes and glinting swords, but the reality, let's just say it's less heroic ride at dawn and more back-breaking labour while being yelled at by someone who hasn't brushed their teeth in months. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, no pressure. Also, drop your city and time in the comments. I want to know who else is staying up way too late to time travel with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in the year 1257, and surprise, you're not galloping across the countryside in shining armour. Nope, you're a squire. Basically, that means you're the medieval version of an unpaid intern. You're 14. Your shoes are made of something that might once have been leather, and you're already soaked in sweat because you spent the last 2 hours polishing Sir Bernard's breastplate. For the third time, because apparently your last polish job lacked spiritual radiance. Squires start young, often at age 7, but you got a late start. You were dumped at the local castle by your very excited parents, who were thrilled that you weren't going to be a farmer like them. They conveniently forgot to mention that squiring means zero glory. You're not swinging swords, you're carrying them. And you're not eating at the feast table, you're cleaning it afterward, while everyone else belts out songs about dragon slaying and St. George. Your day starts before sunrise. You stumble out of your straw-stuffed mattress in the barracks, rubbing your eyes, already itching from whatever's been nesting in your blanket. The air smells like sweat, horse dung, and something slightly pickled. Probably Roger, the other squire who's been wearing the same tunic for a week. You throw on your own tunic, tuck in your belt, and bolt for the stables. If you're late, Sir Bernard makes you carry your own saddle all day. And those things, they weigh as much as your dignity did before you agreed to this job. After helping saddle the horses and brush their manes, while dodging hooves, you head back to the training yard. There you get your favourite part of the day, weapons practice. Except it's not nearly as cool as it sounds. You don't get a real sword, you get a wooden stick that has the balance of a fence post and the bite of a blunt potato. You're supposed to imagine it as an extension of your arm, but all it extends is the bruises across your ribs. Your teacher, or skier, Sir Elric, is a mountain of a man who once split an axe handle with his forehead in a bar fight. He shouts stance and whacks your calves with a cane when your knees lock. You try your best, but between the bruises and your growing resentment for literally everyone around you, you're not exactly improving. On a good day, you knock your opponent's stick out of their hands. On a bad day, like today, you get the wind knocked out of you and land face first in a puddle of something that might be mud. Might. After training, you get a short break, just enough time to scarf down a chunk of hard cheese and bread so stale you could use it as a shield. Then it's off to chores. You clean armour, you mend gear, you polish boots, and you learn how to strap on a full set of plate mail in under 5 minutes. Because if you mess up in the field and Sir Bernard's arm comes loose mid-battle, guess who gets blamed when his arm gets chopped off? Your one real skill, if you can call it that, is knowing every piece of armour by touch. Breastplate, greaves, vambraces, gauntlets. You can suit someone up blindfolded at this point. But no matter how fast you are, you're always too slow for Sir Bernard, who once threatened to throw you into the moat for lacing his helmet too tight. He was joking, probably. Now here's the historical fact for the knight. The path to knighthood was a rigid system. Boys began as pages at around age 7, then became squires in their teens, serving knights directly for years, often a decade or more, before they might be dubbed a knight, assuming they survived. And that was no guarantee. Oh, and quirky fact time. Some squires were actually given dogs to train as part of their service. Not because knights were dog people, but because teaching a dog discipline was considered a sign you could handle your own. You, unfortunately, have no dog. You have a cranky goose named Henrietta who bites ankles. There's also some scholarly debate over whether the squire's role was always a stepping stone to knighthood. In some cases, especially in poorer families or during wartime, squires might never be knighted. They'd live their entire lives serving someone else's glory. So yeah, your dreams of becoming the next Lancelot? Not looking great. By sunset, you're so tired you can barely see straight. You drag your feet back to the barracks, barely muster the strength to peel off your mud-caked tunic, and collapse onto your straw bed. Outside, the castle torchlight flickers, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Inside, Roger is already snoring, Henrietta is honking in her sleep, and your muscles are aching in places you didn't know existed. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all over again. There's no applause, no epic music, no damsels sighing from balconies, just sore legs, cold gruel, and the faint hope that one day, maybe, you'll get to hold a real sword without someone yelling at you. Sleep tight, squire. You'll need it. Dawn creeps in again, and your eyelids feel like they're made of chainmail. You barely sept. Something about Roger's nose whistle and Henrietta the ankle-biting goose repeatedly honking in your ear made it impossible. But there's no time for self-pity. Sir Bernard wants you in the training yard before the sun is fully up, which means no breakfast and definitely no sympathy. You drag yourself up, throat dry, back aching, and hope you'll at least get to swing something sharp today. Today's schedule? Combat training. Swordplay, shield work, grappling. Finally, something with a bit of flair. You imagine yourself slicing through the air, your blade glinting in the morning sun as squires stop to gape in admiration. In your head, you're already halfway to knighthood. Reality, of course, has other plans. Sir Elric stands in the dirt with his arms crossed, a wooden training sword in one hand and that cursed cane in the other. He looks at you like he's already disappointed, and you haven't even messed up yet. You and a dozen other squires line up, wooden swords clutched tight. The air smells like churned earth, sweat and horse manure. A fitting cologne for a future knight. You square off against a tall boy named Giles. Giles has at least 20 pounds on you, and the dead-eyed gaze of someone who enjoys making others bleed just a little too much. The bout begins. You circle. Giles lunges. You parry badly and take a hit to the ribs that knocks the wind out of you. Before you can recover, he trips you with his boot, and you slam into the ground like a sack of turnips. The other squires chuckle. Sir Elric doesn't. He sighs, steps forward, and mutters something about wasted potential, before helping you up with one hand and smacking you with the cane in the other. Training continues, bruises multiply, and your body becomes an unwilling catalogue of dull aches. Swordplay, it turns out, isn't just about swinging wildly. It's stance, balance, timing, footwork, and muscle memory you definitely don't have yet. Every strike is a small disaster. You swing too high, your shield dips, and Giles clocks you again and again. Then come the grappling lessons. Think wrestling, but with less rules and more biting. You and Giles are paired once more, and it quickly devolves into something between a street brawl and a very angry dance. He tries to pin you. You twist and manage to slip free, earning a rare nod of approval from Sir Elric. Encouraged, you attempt a takedown, only to end up in the mud with Giles sitting on your chest, victorious and smug. Again, let's pause for our historical fact. Medieval knight training was brutal for a reason. A knight was expected to fight in close quarters, often while wearing 60 pounds of armour in terrifyingly chaotic environments. Training had to simulate real danger. Squires were drilled for hours a day to build stamina, pain tolerance, and the kind of reflexes you'd need when a mace came flying toward your face. On the quirky side, there's a record from the 14th century where squires were trained not only in combat, but also in dancing. Yes, dancing. Why? Because it was considered good for balance and grace, plus looking cool at court was part of the package. So imagine this. You battered and bruised, now being forced to try a waltz with Giles. That's your Tuesday night. After training, you're sore enough to consider pretending to be dead just to get a break. But there's no time for theatrics. You've got to haul water buckets to the cook's hut, where stew's being prepared for tonight's feast. Not for you, obviously. You'll be lucky if you get the leftover cabbage skins. You try to lift 2 buckets at once, feel your arms scream in protest, and settle for one at a time. It takes you the better part of an hour, during which Henrietta steals half a loaf of bread right out of your satchel. Later, you return to the yard where Sir Bernard is practicing real sword drills. His blade slices through the air with terrifying precision, sparks flying as he strikes at the target dummy. You catch yourself admiring the sheer elegance of it. For a moment, you remember why you wanted this life. Power, glory, the thrill of battle. You picture yourself standing there one day, admired and feared. Then Sir Bernard notices you watching, barks your name, and orders you to clean up the dummy he just destroyed. You get to work, splinters and stuffing everywhere. Your fingers sting, blistered from hauling and sword gripping and whatever it was Giles did to you when the instructors weren't looking. You wonder what your family's doing right now. Probably eating something hot, maybe sitting by the fire. You miss your sister's bread, you miss not smelling like the inside of a horse stable. Here's a point of scholarly debate to chew on while you sweep hay. Historians argue over whether the average squire ever stood a real chance of becoming a knight. Wealth played a huge part. Without money for armour, a horse and a sword all prohibitively expensive, you might serve loyally for years and still be passed over. Some argue knighthood was more about inheritance and connections than merit. So even if you do everything right, you might still die a squire, forgotten and unarmoured. By the time the sun sets, you're limping back toward the barracks, your training tunic damp and stained. Your shoulder throbs from a bad fall, and your ribs feel like they've been used as a loot. Dinner is, predictably, disappointing. A thin stew that tastes like sadness and wilted cabbage. You eat fast, not out of hunger, but because Roger's eyeballing your bowl again. When you finally collapse into bed, every part of you aches. Henrietta hops up next to you, honks softly, and tucks her beak beneath her wing. You close your eyes and wonder how many more days you can take. Then you remember, knighthood is still years away, and if Giles doesn't kill you, the training might. But hey, at least you learnt to fall better today. Progress? You wake up this time not because of the rooster, but because you're drenched in sweat. And no, it's not from a nightmare, it's just incredibly hot. The air inside the barracks is still and suffocating, like someone built a bonfire underneath the floorboards. You're lying on your straw mattress, your tunic glued to your back, and for a moment you wonder if you've somehow been baked overnight like a sad human meat pie. The heat only gets worse when you shuffle out to meet Sir Bernard and see what fresh torture he's got planned. Today, he announces, you'll be helping him suit up in full armour. It's a practical lesson, which you now understand is knightly code for you're about to carry something really heavy. And sure enough, he gestures at a full set of gleaming plate armour laid out on the training table, piece by piece like a medieval jigsaw puzzle made entirely of steel. It's not your first time doing this, but it's the first time you're expected to do it solo, quickly, and without dropping anything. That breastplate? Nearly 20 pounds on its own. The greaves? Awkward and sharp-edged. The helmet? Smells like old onions and dried blood, and probably still has some in there. You try to focus, adjusting the straps with care, securing the vambraces tight enough to hold, but not so tight that Bernard yells again. His body is stiff as a board while you work around him, a human statue that occasionally grunts with disapproval. Your arms start to shake by the time you reach the pauldrons, and the final step, the helmet, nearly tips you over when you lift it. You manage to jam it into the place, and Bernard finally clanks forward with a nod. Success. Until he realises the leg harness is slightly uneven, and suddenly you're redoing the entire left side. Then comes the worst part. You have to suit up yourself. It's part of the training. Bernard wants to see how long you can stand, walk and move while encased in a metal shell. So you begin layering on the pieces, each one heavier than the last. Your movements slower, stiffer, more awkward. By the end, you feel less like a knight and more like a poorly balanced wardrobe. Walking in armour is, let's call it a skill. Your vision is limited to a narrow slit. Your arms can barely lift above your waist. And your body? It's a portable sauna. Within minutes, you're soaked again. Only this time it's not just sweat. It's also panic. You're hot, disoriented, and increasingly convinced that if you trip, you might never get up. Let's hit a historical fact here. Full-plate armour in the late medieval period weighed anywhere from 45 to 60 pounds. Surprisingly, it was engineered well enough that knights could run, mount horses, and fight in it, but only after months or years of conditioning. You've worn it for 15 minutes and your back already feels like a snapped bowstring. Now, for a little quirky twist, knights sometimes had armour assistants to help them on and off with the gear. That's not surprising. But what is surprising is that nobles would occasionally sleep in pieces of their armour before battle to stay in the mindset of war. Imagine trying to sleep in an iron helmet while someone next to you snores like a dying badger. That's commitment. Or insanity, possibly both. You manage to waddle across the courtyard, feeling like a kettle about to burst. Sir Bernard orders you to lift your training sword, which now feels like it weighs twice what it did yesterday. You manage a clumsy swing, then another. With each movement, your breathing grows shallower. The sun presses down and there's no breeze to speak of. The armour holds everything in, your sweat, your heat, your regret. There's a moment, a dangerous one, when you think you're about to faint. Your vision goes soft around the edges. You stop, take a breath through the narrow slit in your helmet, and silently pray you don't pass out in front of everyone. You don't. Barely. Sir Bernard watches, unimpressed. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether knights truly wore full-play armour all the time in battle. Some historians argue that, especially during long marches or quick skirmishes, knights might have opted for lighter chainmail or partial plate instead of the full set. Others insist that when it was time for real combat, going full plate was the only way to survive. Either way, walking in it like you are now, absolute misery. The rest of the day is more of the same. You train in your armour for hours, marching, sword drills and shield blocks that send vibrations up through your bones. You're moving slower with every lap, your shoulders burning, your thighs on fire. Even when you stop, the armour keeps heating you from the inside out. It's like walking around in a furnace that also pinches your armpits. By the time Bernard finally calls an end to the exercise, you practically collapse where you stand. 2 other squires have to help you unbuckle and unstrap yourself before you melt into the gravel. You slump down on a water barrel, gulping down cool liquid, while blinking up at the darkening sky. Your tunic is soaked, your skin is raw where the metal chafed, and you have a new appreciation for gravity. Dinner is another thin broth, this time with suspiciously crunchy bits, and a hunk of black bread that might double as a weapon. You chew slowly, still not fully recovered. Everyone's quiet tonight. The training has wrung you all dry. Roger is too tired to steal anyone's bowl, and even Henrietta seems unusually chill, pecking at her grain pile like she's deep in thought. Later, lying in bed, you feel the weight of the day pressing down harder than the armour ever did. You wanted to be a knight. You wanted glory, honour, adventure. Instead, you're sunburnt, blistered, and have a weird rash on your hip from where a strap rubbed wrong. Your muscles scream every time you shift. You close your eyes and silently beg your body to heal by morning. Welcome to life inside a steel coffin. The nightly dream? Not quite what the bards sing about. You wake up sore in new places, not the normal I lifted too many hay bales kind of sore either. This is my bones have opinions now sore. You roll over and groan, every joint protesting like it's unionizing. Your back pops, your knees creak, and your arms feel like you spent all night arm wrestling a bear. But no rest for the battle-weary. Today, Sir Bernard announces, you're finally going to joust. Well, kind of. You imagine galloping down a list field, lance at the ready, banners fluttering in the wind, and an entire court of nobles gasping in awe as you unhorse some villain with a single blow. Instead, what you get is a thick pole jammed into your armpit, a dull wooden lance, and a horse that clearly hates you. His name is Thunderbolt. He's ancient, flatulent, and gives you a look like he's considering dumping you in a ditch and galloping back to the oat bucket. You try to mount up with some dignity. It goes badly. You catch a stirrup with your boot, slip, and nearly faceplant. Thunderbolt lets out a long sigh like this is his 200th failed squire today. With a helpful shove from Giles, who insists it was an accidental bump, you finally get seated. The saddle is high-backed and deep, designed to keep you locked in place, but it also feels like it's slowly dislocating your hips. Sir Elric stands at the edge of the makeshift list, arms folded, yelling instructions while chewing something that might be tobacco, might be bark. Keep the lance level, lower it before impact. If you drop it, you're done. Your opponent is another squire, a red-headed boy from the next village over, who has already jousted twice this week and looks way too confident for someone wearing a soup pot on his head. The two of you line up at opposite ends of the dusty track, squinting through your helmets, lances pointed vaguely in each other's direction. Then comes the signal, a shouted, "Go!" and a sharp whistle. Thunderbolt lurches forward like he's being dragged by invisible reins. You jostle and bounce in the saddle, trying to keep the lance steady while your arm shakes like it's got a mind of its own. The redhead charges, his own lance bobbing dangerously close to your head. At the midpoint, there's a clumsy clash. Neither of you actually hits square on, but your lance slides harmlessly off his shoulder while his clips your helmet. Not enough to knock you off, but enough to rattle your brains like dice in a cup. You wobble in the saddle, somehow don't fall, and Thunderbolt keeps going like he's done with all this nonsense. You loop around, and Sir Elric waves his hand. Again, 4 more passes. By the end, you can barely lift your arm. You've dropped your lance once, gotten hit twice, and Thunderbolt stepped on your foot when you dismounted. Not that it matters. Your boot took most of the damage. Still, your big toe is now the colour of a plum. Here's the historical fact for today. Jousting wasn't just a sideshow. In the later Middle Ages, it was serious business. It trained knights in combat techniques, showcased their skills before nobles and royalty, and was sometimes even used to settle disputes. But the real tournaments, they were dangerous. People died, lances shattered into splinters, and armour cracked. One of the most famous jousting deaths was King Henry II of France, who took a lance fragment through the eye during a friendly match. Ouch! And now for a little-known oddity. Some lances were designed to break on impact, on purpose. Tournament lances had hollow tips or special scoring marks that made them shatter more easily. Why? Because audiences loved the drama. The more splinters flying through the air, the better. Nothing says entertainment like wood shrapnel to the face. Back in your reality, your jousting session ends with Sir Elric clapping your shoulder, not out of pride, but to see if you'll fall over. You don't. Barely. He grunts in approval and mutters, "You didn't die, that's a start." After that, it's off to polish the armour used during training. Not your favourite task. The dust and grit from the jousting field has lodged itself in every crevice, and your hands are already raw from scrubbing the day before. You work quietly in the shade, the sun beating down just feet away, making the metal so hot it nearly burns your fingertips. You stop a few times to shake out your wrists and pop your fingers. No one notices, no one cares. The other squires trickle in, sharing their bruises like trophies. Giles has a cut above his eye and a limp, and he's weirdly proud of both. He claims he nearly unhorsed his opponent, though you watch that match and are pretty sure he just fell off sideways after sneezing. Still, his story gets nods of approval. You keep your mouth shut. Here's something scholars still debate. How much actual combat skill did jousting develop? Some say it was theatre with real stakes. Others argue it made knights worse fighters by encouraging reckless charges and unrealistic techniques. After all, war isn't a one-on-one duel, it's chaos. Screaming, flanking ambushes, smoke and bad weather. But try telling that to a noble lord whose son just got a tournament trophy. He's not here for nuance. He's here for clanging metal and prestige. By sundown, you're a walking bruise. Dinner is served out of a pot that smells like it's hiding a secret. And the bread is even harder than yesterday. You soak it in broth until it's at least chewable, then eat slowly, watching the torches flicker along the stone walls. You're too tired to talk, too sore to joke. Even Henrietta seems subdued tonight, sitting near your feet with a surprisingly non-aggressive cluck. Before bed, you sneak away to the training field one last time. It's quiet, moonlit, the dust from earlier settled into soft patches. You pick up a practice lance, lighter now that your arm's not shaking, and aim it at a dummy in the dark. You charge, alone, no audience, no pressure. The lance bounces off harmlessly, but this time you feel just a little more in control. Back in the barracks, you lie in bed and listen to the sounds of sleeping squires and creaking beams. Your toe still throbs, your shoulders ache, but you did it. You didn't fall, not completely anyway. And in this world, that counts for something. Your eyes open to an empty bedroll beside you and a chill in the air. Someone left the barracks door open again. Probably Roger, off chasing some dreamy idea of breakfast. You sit up, slow and stiff, your joints creaking like you're 60 years older than you are. There's dried mud flaking off your knees and a splinter in your palm from last night's solo lance session. But the worst part. Today you find out that your horse is not only disobedient but also possibly demonic. Sir Bernard has declared the day will be devoted to mounted training, manoeuvring, formation drills and mounted sword strikes. It's a huge step in squire life, bordering on exciting, if not for one thing, Thunderbolt, the elderly warhorse you've been assigned, whose preferred hobby is biting things, including you. You trudge to the stables where Thunderbolt greets you with a dead-eyed stare and a loud wet snort. His breath smells like fermented hay and old socks. You try to pat his neck to get on his good side. He responds by swatting you with his tail and shifting his weight just enough to crush your foot against the stall door. You yelp. He looks proud. Once saddled, Thunderbolt reluctantly allows you to climb on. The saddle is still slightly damp from yesterday's training, never a great sign, and your knees are already screaming before the warm-up even begins. Sir Elric orders the squires into a line and begins shouting commands, his voice echoing across the training field like thunder. Forward, left turn, column halt. You and Thunderbolt manage the first few turns without issue, but once it's time to pivot around a barrel at a trot, he suddenly decides he's in charge. He jerks sideways, nearly unseating you. You grab the reins and try to correct him, but he spins, stops, and gives you a small crow hop that sends you up in the air and back down so hard you bite your tongue. Sir Elric just nods, as if this is all part of the lesson. You glare down at Thunderbolt. He might actually be smirking. You've always assumed knights were natural horsemen, elegant, majestic, in total command of their steeds. Turns out it's a learned skill. A painfully slow, thigh-burning, ego-crushing skill. You spend hours practicing turns, stops and sword strikes while in motion. Each time you raise your blade, your balance wobbles. Thunderbolt doesn't make it easier. He refuses to canter, chews on the reins when you're not looking, and at one point tries to eat your helmet. Let's throw in a historical fact while you're fuming in the saddle. Warhorses in the Middle Ages, known as destriers, were massively valuable. Trained from a young age to respond to subtle cues and remain calm amid chaos, they were bred not just for strength but intelligence. Some could be directed with just a shift of the knees or a tug of a leg, like giant armoured labradors. But destriers were also incredibly expensive, often costing more than your family's entire farm. And here's a weird one. Many knights actually had multiple horses. A destrier for battle, a palfrey for travel, and a rouncey for general use or pack duties. It's sort of like having a sports car, a road trip van, and a clunky old work truck. You of course only have Thunderbolt, who feels more like a haunted wheelbarrow with attitude. After the mounted drills, Sir Bernard decides it's time for sword strikes from horseback. You ride past a row of training dummies while trying to swing your blade without falling off. It's harder than it looks. You miss completely on the first pass, your sword sailing through empty air. The second time you clip the dummy's shoulder. The third time you manage a decent hit, but it throws off your balance and you nearly tumble off Thunderbolt sideways. He slows down just enough to keep you from breaking your neck, but he's clearly not impressed. Giles, meanwhile, makes it look easy. He carves into each dummy with flair, lifting his wooden sword high afterward like he's posing for a tapestry. You hate how good he is at this. It's probably the expensive boots, or the fact that his horse Tamsin actually listens when spoken to. After training, your legs feel like stretched taffy. Dismounting is an awkward flop more than a proper dismount, and you land in a heap groaning. Sir Bernard chuckles and tells you, you'll learn to land on your feet eventually, or you won't. Very comforting. You limp to the shade of the stables and try to rub some feeling back into your thighs while thinking about the knightly life. No one ever writes songs about saddle rash or that horrible numbness you get from riding for hours. And you're behind? Let's just say if you never see a saddle again, it'll be too soon. Let's pause for the scholarly debate of the day. Were knights really horsebound warriors in most battles, or was that just idealised fluff? Some historians argue that by the High Middle Ages, many knights actually fought dismounted, especially in tough terrain or sieges. The romanticised image of charging lines of armoured knights? That definitely happened, but not all the time. In reality, logistics, terrain and strategy often dictated whether a knight rode into battle or slugged it out on foot like everyone else. By evening, you're hobbling back to the barracks like someone 3 times your age. You're too tired to even take off your boots. Henrietta waddles up, honks once, then settles next to you, clearly unimpressed by your new knightly scent. You lie back on your straw mattress, arms flopped at your sides, staring up at the wooden ceiling. Outside, you hear other squires laughing, probably Giles retelling how he landed a direct hit on his dummy while doing some fancy flourish. You want to care, you really do, but you're already halfway asleep, your body aching, your stomach half full of salted fish and bread crust. Somewhere in the haze of sleep, you dream of riding a perfect warhorse. It's tall, sleek, obedient. You gallop through a field with your sword raised high, striking down enemies with ease. The wind is cool, the saddle comfortable, and no one is yelling at you. Then the horse turns around and reveals Henrietta's head and honks in your face. You wake up laughing, or maybe sobbing. Hard to tell. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're already regretting your life choices. You're woken not by a rooster, but by someone banging on a shield outside the barracks like it owes them money. Sir Bernard wants all squires outside for field readiness inspection, which you quickly learn is code for let's see who remembered to clean their armour last night. Spoiler alert, you didn't. You jump out of bed, nearly step on Henrietta, who squawks furiously and waddles off to attack Roger's exposed toe, and scramble to grab your gear. You rush outside into the cold morning air, breath fogging in front of you, armour clanking loosely against your sides because you didn't buckle it properly in your panic. Bernard paces up and down the line of sleepy-eyed squires, inspecting helmets, checking boots, occasionally muttering shoddy or acceptable with increasing levels of contempt. When he reaches you, he stops. You can feel his eyes narrowing even though his face doesn't move. He lifts your shoulder plate with one gloved hand, sniffs, and raises an eyebrow. "Smells like mildew and disappointment," he says. "Fix it. Now!" You spend the next half hour scrubbing your armour with a handful of dry straw and a rag that's mostly holes, cursing your forgetfulness and the existence of armour in general. By the time you're done, your fingers are scratched and your palms are blackened with grime, but your armour passes a second inspection, barely, and you're allowed to eat breakfast. Eat might be a generous term. Today's meal consists of a bowl of barley mush, so bland it could be used to interrogate spies. You shovel it down quickly because the morning's schedule is already posted. Weapon maintenance, then honour and conduct lessons in the Great Hall. Yes, because what every sore, exhausted teen wants after sword practice is a lecture on morality from a priest who smells like boiled cabbage. You start with weapons maintenance. You sit in a small shed behind the training yard, surrounded by swords, spears and axes, each needing sharpening, oiling and inspection. You take a whetstone to a chipped longsword, dragging the edge carefully across its surface, sparks flicking off with each pass. The repetition is oddly soothing, at least until Roger shows up and nearly slices his own hand open trying to show off. You bandage him up with a strip of your sleeve and return to work, muttering insults under your breath. After 2 hours, you're summoned into the Great Hall for your lesson on chivalric virtue, which sounds lovely, until you realise it's just an ageing monk named Father Bertram droning on for an hour about humility, loyalty and defending the weak, while a knight next to him picks his teeth with a dagger. You sit cross-legged on the cold stone floor, trying to stay awake as Bertram quotes ancient codes of conduct in Latin and occasionally glares at anyone who yawned too loudly. Here's your historical fact for the day. The concept of chivalry wasn't a fixed rulebook, it evolved over time. What began as a loose warrior code eventually included religious piety, courtly manners, and even poetry. That's right, knights were expected to recite verses and woo ladies with flowery words, which is a hilarious contrast to you now, scratching yourself through your tunic while Bertram mumbles about tempering wrath with compassion. And for the oddity of the day, some knights actually took their chivalric vows while lying on a stone floor in full armour, symbolising death to their old self and rebirth as a noble warrior. Sounds poetic, sure, but after a week in armour, lying on stone sounds like a punishment, not a ceremony. Bertram wraps up with a quiz. You fail, badly. He asks the 4 virtues of a knight and you accidentally say bread, horses, courage and, washing. The other squires laugh. Giles smirks. You want the floor to swallow you whole. Bertram sighs and mutters something about moral decay among the youth. Mercifully, you're dismissed for the afternoon. But don't get too excited. Sir Bernard has a new assignment. You're on clean-up duty in the main hall after the evening's feast. Not invited to the feast, mind you. Just the mopping up afterward. Before that, you help set up. Long wooden tables are dragged into place, piles of firewood stacked, torches lit. You're sent to the kitchens to haul barrels of ale and trays of food, spiced meats, bread, root vegetables. It smells heavenly. You're not allowed to touch a crumb. As night falls, the great hall fills with noblemen, visiting knights and local lords. They're loud, already drunk, and entirely unaware of your existence. You and the other squires press yourself into the shadows, watching as platters pass by, mouths watering. Sir Bernard is at the main table, laughing with someone who once tried to stab him in a duel, which feels very on-brand for this century. You're given a single task: keep the dogs away from the food. Yes, medieval feasts were that chaotic. 6 half-wild hounds weave between the tables, snapping at bones and occasionally biting the legs of careless guests. You chase them with a broom, occasionally smacking a haunch, trying not to trip over wine puddles or half-eaten turnips. Here's the scholarly debate of the night. Did all knights truly adhere to chivalric ideals? The answer predictably is no. While some strove to uphold them, many knights were closer to heavily armed bullies, extorting peasants, burning villages, ignoring church rules unless someone was watching. The romantic image? Mostly polished propaganda, painted centuries later by those with a lot to gain from rewriting history. The feast finally ends with singing, most of it off-key, and guests stumbling out into the courtyard to relieve themselves in corners and flower pots. You're left to clean the carnage: overturned mugs, grease-smeared benches, bones everywhere. Henrietta shows up halfway through, steals a roast parsnip and runs for it like she's looting a temple. You finally crawl back to your bed near midnight, hands raw, head spinning from exhaustion and the lingering scent of roasted pig. You close your eyes and try to remember the virtue of patience Bertram went on about. You're pretty sure you failed that test too. You don't actually remember falling asleep. 1 minute you were lying on your straw mattress, boots still on, fingers smelling like old meat and pine tar. The next minute it's morning again, and Henrietta is pecking your face like she's ringing a doorbell. You push her off, muttering curses that would absolutely violate the knightly code of honour, and sit up blinking against the slanted morning light sneaking in through the barrack shutters. Today's task, bath duty. Not for yourself, mind you. That would be far too civilised. No, today you're hauling buckets for Sir Bernard's monthly ceremonial bath. That's right, 1 bath. A month. The man smells like a wet dungeon, and you're about to be way too involved in fixing that. You start by fetching water from the well. Cold, heavy, and probably full of things that would terrify a microscope if they'd been invented yet. Each bucket sloshes as you carry it up to the solar chamber, where Bernard's tub waits, carved from wood, reinforced with iron bands, and already steaming slightly thanks to heated stones. Once the water's poured in and perfumed with stale herbs and something that smells suspiciously like onion peels, you're dismissed. Bernard wants privacy while his attendants scrub him like a temple idol. Fine by you. You'd rather wrestle a boar than watch him lose layers of skin. So you think you're off the hook until a voice calls you back. Turns out your name was volunteered for a group bath next, for hygiene reasons, which is rich coming from a place where people think bathing too often might kill you. You trudge toward the training yard's corner where a giant shared wooden vat sits steaming faintly in the sun, surrounded by soap chunks, cracked combs, and a wooden ladle that looks like it's seen things. You strip down with the other squires, trying not to make eye contact as everyone shuffles awkwardly into the murky water. It's warm, yes, but also deeply suspicious. You're pretty sure someone's sock is floating near your elbow. Still, after weeks of grime, it's almost refreshing. You scrub under your arms, dunk your head, and try to ignore the sounds Roger is making as he attempts to clean between his toes with a spoon. Here's a historical nugget for your troubled brain. Despite what people often say, medieval folks did bathe. Just not very often. Hot water was a luxury, and heating it took forever. Communal bathhouses existed in towns and cities, though over time they became less about cleanliness and more about, well, entertainment of the adult kind. The church eventually cracked down on those. Still, for the average person, especially a soldier or squire, a bath meant a cold stream or maybe a bucket over the head if you were lucky. And for the quirky fact, some nobles were deeply suspicious of bathing too often. There are records of physicians warning that hot water opened your pores and let disease in. One French king famously bragged that he only bathed twice in his entire life. That might explain why royal portraits never included a scratch and sniff option. Back in your vat of mystery broth, Giles is loudly declaring that real knights don't need to bathe because their honour keeps them clean. You accidentally splash water in his direction with a particularly aggressive scrub and pretend it was an accident. Henrietta sits nearby, watching with what might be mild judgment. After your group bath, and 3 rinses to get the weird film off your skin, you're handed fresh linens, itchy, off-white, and probably recycled from someone else's laundry pile. Still, they smell better than your old tunic, and that's enough. You change behind a threadbare curtain, trying not to step in the puddle Roger left, and emerge feeling strangely reborn. Of course, the illusion of cleanliness lasts about 10 minutes. You're immediately sent to muck out the lower stables, where a pair of colts have turned their straw into something resembling a toxic marsh. You grab a pitchfork and get to work, the heat climbing as you dig through the muck, your new clothes already speckled with stains. You start to sweat again, and just like that, the medieval spa day is over. As you work, Bernard strolls by, freshly bathed and wearing a robe that might once have been white. He sniffs the air, raises an eyebrow at your re-dirty state, and grunts something about how real knights aren't afraid to stink. Which contradicts literally everything you just endured. But sure, consistency isn't exactly the Middle Ages' strong suit. Here's a debate still rumbling through scholarly circles. How dirty were people actually back then? Some historians argue that hygiene was much better than we assume. People did care about cleanliness, especially before the church got nervous about communal bathing. But others say the constant exposure to filth, poor plumbing, and lack of knowledge about germs meant that even the cleanest night would still smell like a ham that's been left in the sun. Afternoon rolls around and Sir Elric announces full armoured drills, again, in the sun. You groan, suit up, and trudge back to the field where you're promptly whacked in the shin by Giles accidentally. It's not a good day. You're hot, exhausted, and your bath glow has been replaced with heat rash. You spend the next hour stumbling around like a clanking kettle, wondering how your ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. Dinner brings no relief. The stew is gritty, probably from someone dropping the ladle in the dirt. The bread is unusually sour. You eat anyway. Hunger trumps flavour. Barely. Back in the barracks, you change into your now not-so-clean linens, lie back and think about the great contradiction of knightly life. Everyone praises honour and cleanliness, but you're constantly filthy and lied to. You sigh and pull your blanket up. Henrietta hops onto your chest and settles in. You smell faintly of lavender. It's probably not going to last. You wake to shouting, not the usual snoring or squabbling over stolen crusts, but real shouting, the kind that comes with urgency, clanging metal, and a distinct smell of something burning. You sit bolt upright, your heart already racing before your brain catches up. Giles flies past your bunk half-dressed, his helmet backward and sword dragging behind him. Roger yells something about the gate. Henrietta honks like a battle horn and flutters out the door. You scramble into your gear, skipping boots and tightening your belt with shaking hands. Outside, the castle yard is chaos. Smoke curls above the outer wall. The bell tower clangs frantically, and squires are running in every direction. Some try to form up, others just try to look busy enough not to get yelled at. Sir Bernard, already armoured, roars for order as the main gate shakes under the weight of whatever's slamming it from the other side. This, you realise, is your first real taste of siege. It isn't a full-blown war, not yet. Just a bandit raid, or maybe a rival baron trying to stir up trouble. But it's still real. Arrows, fire, shouting, fear. You duck behind a stone wall as a flaming projectile sails over the ramparts and crashes into the pig shed, which promptly explodes in a squealing ball of smoke. The pigs are fine. Angry, but fine. So Elric grabs your arm and shouts in your face, "Get to the battlements! Bring bolts! Help the archers!" You nod before realising you're nodding at someone already sprinting away. You rush to the armoury, grab a crate of crossbow bolts, way too heavy, and stagger toward the stairs. The tower steps are uneven, slick with panic and ash. You trip once, nearly drop the crate, and only make it to the top because another squire grabs your elbow and pulls you the final few steps. Up on the wall, the view is terrifying. Below, a ragged group of men in mismatched armour surge toward the gate with makeshift ladders and torches. Some are shouting curses, others just screaming. You set the crate down beside the archers, who are already firing into the crowd below. The twang of bowstrings is constant, broken by the occasional scream or impact. One of the guards to your left takes a bolt in the shoulder and drops to his knees. Blood paints the stone. You blink, shocked, but someone else drags him back without a word. Historical fact time. Castles weren't just homes for nobility, they were military fortresses, often under threat during periods of unrest. And while full sieges could last weeks or even months, most attacks were short raids, quick attempts to loot, destabilise or provoke. Defending against them wasn't just a knight's job, it was everyone's. Squires, servants, cooks, if you could lift a bucket or toss a rock, you were conscripted. Back to the nightmare. Someone hands you a bow. It's too large for you, the string taut like it's angry, but you notch an arrow anyway and lean over the wall. You aim, not at anyone in particular, just at movement, and let it fly. It misses. You fire again, miss again, the third arrow hits something. You're not sure what. Probably not a bandit. Possibly a chicken. Maybe Henrietta. You stop to scan the yard. She's fine. She's chasing a wounded rat and seems deeply invested in finishing the job. One of the attackers actually makes it to the base of the wall and begins climbing a ladder. You stare, frozen, until a knight beside you heaves a rock over the edge. It strikes the man squarely, sending him tumbling back with a horrible crunch. The knight nods and moves on. You swallow hard and wipe your palms on your tunic, suddenly aware that your hands are shaking. Now for a weird but true detail. Medieval defenders sometimes used boiling oil or pitch to repel attackers. The pitch was more common. It was cheaper and just as awful. If you think getting a paper cut hurts, imagine hot tar in your hair. You don't have to, you watch it happen. Someone above tips a pot and the black goo splashes down onto a poor soul below. The screaming is not something you'll forget. Eventually the raiders retreat. It's hard to tell why. Maybe their leader was taken out. Maybe they weren't paid enough. Maybe the pig scared them. Regardless, then they scatter into the woods, dragging the wounded and leaving behind a few bodies, broken ladders and smouldering torches. Sir Bernard stands atop the gatehouse, bloodied but grinning like he just won a tournament. You're still behind the parapet, staring at the carnage. Here's the scholarly debate. Just how common were full sieges or violent raids on castles? Some argue that films and novels exaggerate the frequency. Most castles never saw battle. Others insist that border castles or those near disputed lands were attacked regularly, especially during succession crises. Wherever you fall on that scale, one thing is clear. Today wasn't pretend. It was real enough to make your stomach turn. Cleanup begins immediately. You're assigned corpse duty. No, not burying them, that's too much effort for today, just moving them out of sight. You and another squire drag 2 attackers out of the yard, trying not to gag. One has no shoes, the other has a coin pouch, still full. You don't ask questions. You don't take anything. You're too tired, too sickened, too human for looting. By evening, the smell of smoke still lingers. The pigs have been relocated. The wounded are bandaged, and the rest of you are praised for your bravery, even though you mostly cried into your sleeve and missed all your shots. Dinner is bread and cheese. Somehow it tastes better tonight. You're still alive. You collapse in your bunk, armour off, but grime still sticking to your skin. Your ears ring with phantom screams. Your arms feel like they don't belong to you anymore. Giles is silent for once. Roger too. Even Henrietta doesn't honk, just curls up at your feet, blinking slowly like she knows something you don't. You stare at the ceiling and realise something that feels obvious and terrifying. War isn't glory. It's dirt and fear and your heart pounding like a war drum while someone screams in a language you don't understand. No bard ever sings about this part. But you made it through your first attack, and that counts for something. The morning after your first skirmish feels like waking from a week-long bender. Every part of your body is sore, but it's a strange kind of soreness. Not the ache of bruises or the sting of scraped skin, but something deeper. Your muscles are tense, and your thoughts are foggy, and your stomach turns at the memory of what you saw. The worst part is the smell that still lingers on your tunic. Smoke, blood, and some unidentifiable tang of burning wood mixed with fear sweat. You try to scrub it off with cold water and a handful of gritty soap, but it's no use. The stink has claimed you. No one talks much at breakfast. The squires are quiet, eyes downcast, bread half-eaten. Even Giles just stares at his stew, stirring it in circles like he's searching for answers at the bottom of the bowl. Roger chews absent-mindedly on a strip of jerky while Henrietta pecks at spilled oats near his feet. Her feathers unusually fluffed, like even she feels the tension in the air. You don't get much time to reflect. After breakfast, you're pulled aside by Sir Bernard and told to report to the castle's healer. Not because you're wounded, but because she needs help tending the ones who are. Your stomach drops. You'd hope today might be a quiet return to sweeping, or maybe sword drills, something predictable, something impersonal. But now you're walking across the courtyard toward a low stone hut with a wooden door that creaks like it's hiding secrets. Inside, it's warm and damp. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, rot, and something that might be vinegar. The healer, a stern woman named Sister Malis, is already elbow-deep in bloody linen when you arrive. She doesn't look up, just points to a basin and tells you to wash your hands. You do it quickly, glancing around at the makeshift infirmary. Straw pallets on the floor, some occupied by men groaning softly or lying frighteningly still. Your first job is simple. Hold down a soldier, while Sister Malis stitches up a deep gash across his thigh. Simple, of course, if you ignore the way he screams into the mattress or the way his blood soaks your sleeve. You try not to flinch, you try not to vomit. But after the third patient, a guard missing half a finger, you step outside and heave behind the hut, hands shaking. Here's your historical fact for today. Battlefield medicine in the Middle Ages was about as grim as you'd imagine. With little understanding of germ theory, treatments ranged from the rudimentary herbal poultices to the outright horrifying cauterization with red-hot irons or draining bad humours with leeches. There were no anaesthetics, no antibiotics, and definitely no sterile tools. Infection was more lethal than the initial wound, and for your weird fringe detail, some healers believed that powdered emeralds mixed with honey could stop bleeding and heal battle wounds. Others swore by dried toad powder. You're not sure what's in the jar labelled special salve on Melis's shelf, but it glows faintly and smells like burnt mushrooms. You decide not to ask. Back inside, you fetch clean cloth, boil water, and try to keep your face neutral as Sister Melis works. One of the squires from another keep has a shattered arm, his bone bent like a snapped twig. When Melis sets it, he screams so loud the rafters shake. You flinch, but she doesn't. She's done this before. Later, you help prepare bandages by tearing old linens into strips and dipping them in wine. Melis explains that it's not ideal, but the alcohol helps fight infection. Sometimes, she adds, we just pray and hope the fever breaks. That's the part they never tell you in stories. That sometimes all a healer can offer is hope and a cool cloth on your forehead while your body fights its own war. Here's a scholarly debate that feels uncomfortably relevant now. How effective were medieval healers? Some argue they were more competent than we give them credit for, particularly in their use of herbs and practical wound care. Others believe they were limited by superstition and the Church's restrictions on anatomy studies, leading to more harm than help. You don't know what side you're on, but you've seen enough today to know you never want to end up on one of those pallets. When you're finally dismissed, it's near sundown. You're exhausted in a different way. Your body's fine, but your head's full. Images of blood, pale faces, trembling hands. You walk slowly back to the barracks, past the blackened remains of the pig shed, past the archers still on watch, past the place where someone died yesterday and left a stain in the dirt. You eat dinner in silence, the bread dry and crumbly, the stew overly salted. You don't care. Roger asks if you saw anyone lose a leg. You just shake your head and keep chewing. Even Henrietta seems quieter, resting her beak on her wing and not even bothering to beg for scraps. Later, lying in your bunk, you stare up at the rafters and think about how close death feels now. Not in a dramatic, I will die a noble death in battle kind of way, but in the real sense, the messy, slow, smelly truth of it. You think about the guard who coughed blood when he sat up and the knight whose eyes didn't open even after they stopped the bleeding. You wonder what kind of knight you're becoming. Is it the kind that rushes into battle with a cry of honour? Or the kind that holds a man down while his wounds are stitched shut knowing that it might not be enough? For now, you're just a squire with stained sleeves and sore hands. You fall asleep wishing you were still afraid of falling off a horse. That seemed easier. You wake to the sound of someone retching into a bucket. It's Roger. Again. The bucket, mercifully, is in the corner of the barracks this time instead of under your bunk. You sit up slowly, your body stiff from yesterday's work in the infirmary, and your mind foggy with dread. You already know something's off. The air smells wrong, sharper, mustier. There's an odd quiet beyond the usual early morning rustling. Fewer footsteps, no barking from the yard dogs. Even Henrietta, usually first in line to peck someone's face, is huddled in the corner, feathers puffed and eyes blinking slowly. Then someone whispers the word. You don't want to believe it at first. Roger's just a mess, right? He always eats whatever's left in the cook's scrap bucket, including stuff Henrietta rejected. But as you shuffle toward the training yard for morning roll call, the whispers grow louder. He's not the only one, someone mutters. Saw 2 lads puking behind the stables. Cook collapsed in the kitchens. Water from the west well's gone bad. You clutch your stomach like that alone will protect you. Sir Bernard appears in the courtyard, looking like he hasn't slept. He's holding a cloth over his nose and mouth, his voice muffled as he barks out orders. No weapons training today, no mounted drills. All squires are to report for sanitation duty, which, as you quickly find out, is just a fancy way of saying, you'll be digging a lot of holes and burning a lot of things. Your first stop is the latrine trench. It's been overflowing for days, and now it's become a full-blown health hazard. You're handed a shovel, a strip of cloth to tie over your mouth, and a wink from Giles, who's somehow still managing to flirt in a crisis. You consider smacking him with the shovel. The work is grueling. You dig deeper trenches, haul waste buckets, scatter ash and lime, and scrub down wooden benches with boiling vinegar water. You didn't even know that was a thing people did, but Sister Melis shows up and tells everyone flatly, we do it now or we all die. So you boil vinegar and pour it on everything. Your nose burns, your arms ache, Your stomach tightens at the smell. Here's your historical truth for the day. Dysentery was one of the most common killers in the medieval world. It could sweep through an army camp, a village, or a castle faster than a blade ever could. Poor hygiene, contaminated water, and overcrowded conditions created a perfect breeding ground. The symptoms were brutal: vomiting, fever, bloody diarrhea, and extreme dehydration. For the weak, the old, or the very young, it was often fatal. Now for your quirky fact. Some people back then believed dysentery was caused by miasma, or bad air. So to purify it, they burned aromatic herbs, spices, or even dried animal dung. The theory was, if it stinks, the disease goes away, which is kind of hilarious, since it already stinks beyond reason. You help carry a small cart of dried rosemary and thyme to the Great Hall, where someone lights it on fire in a brazier. It smells like someone's trying to cook a very confused stew. As the day stretches on, the castle gets quieter. Fewer people move about. Meals are late, meagre, and accompanied by warnings. Boil your water, don't eat anything raw, no ale from the lower barrels. You fill your canteen with water that's been boiled to the point it tastes like it's trying to be soup. Still, you drink every drop. Anything's better than catching what Roger has. The most sobering moment of the day comes when a cart passes by, pulled slowly by a donkey. On it lie 3 bodies, covered in linen, bound for burial outside the walls. They're not soldiers. They're kitchen workers. People you passed by every day without noticing. Now they're gone, just like that. You look around the courtyard and notice how pale everyone looks, how nervous. Sir Bernard snaps at a squire who spills a bucket of clean water. Sir Elric coughs and immediately insists it's just the dust. Henrietta hasn't honked once all day. Here's a scholarly debate for you. Some argue that medieval people were resigned to sickness and death, accepting it as divine punishment or fate. Others believe they feared it deeply and often resorted to desperate, creative, or even self-destructive measures to avoid it. You're starting to see both sides. You haven't touched your stew in hours, and you're using vinegar water to wash your hands before and after everything. Even Giles looks like he might cry if he gets splashed again. That night the castle enters a kind of lockdown. The gates are sealed, no one allowed in or out. Sir Bernard posts guards at the wells to make sure no one drinks from the wrong one. Anyone with a fever is sent to the stables, converted into a quarantine ward. You help carry straw bedding out there, eyes averted as you pass the sick. You hear coughing, groaning, someone whispering a prayer. You return to the barracks in the dark, your boots squelching from the slop you've walked through all day. The air is still, almost sacred in its silence. Roger is asleep, twitching slightly. Giles is lying on his bunk with a damp cloth over his eyes. Henrietta has nested near your pillow, feathers puffed like she's trying to guard you from the invisible enemy floating through the air. You lie awake longer than usual, staring at the cracked ceiling beams, counting the creaks. You try not to think about the water you drank at breakfast, or that weird smell on your gloves earlier, or the fact that Sister Malis looked just a little pale this afternoon. You try, but it doesn't help. You know the truth now. You might survive sword drills, armor training, and even enemy raids, but if you're not careful, it won't be a blade that kills you. It'll be a toilet bucket and a spoiled turnip. Welcome to Knight's training, where the true final boss is digestive collapse. You start the day the same way you ended the last one, checking your own pulse like that's going to change anything. It's there, faint but steady, and you don't feel feverish. Yet. You glance across the barracks. Roger is gone. No one says anything, but his empty cot speaks louder than any conversation could. Giles hasn't made a joke in 2 days. Even Henrietta, your emotionally unstable feathered companion, seems off. She won't leave your side and has taken to softly honking at your boots like she's trying to warn them. The castle is quieter than it's ever been. You walk to morning inspection with fewer feet around you, fewer voices in the hall. Even Sir Bernard seems subdued, his armour less polished, his eyes ringed, in fatigue. The sickness has taken its toll, but the castle holds. For now. Still, the air feels heavy, like it's soaked in waiting. Sir Bernard assigns you to check on the keep's defences. The patrol includes tower walk, wall inspection, and, you dread this one most, a visit to the castle's living quarters. Not the noble rooms, but the servant wings, the back corridors, and the long, draughty hallway where your nightmares live. The outer ramparts connected to the keep. Draughty, dark, and unsettlingly alive with rats the size of cats. You begin with the wall patrol, scaling the spiral staircase with aching calves and a mild fear of heights you pretend you don't have. The top of the wall is cold this morning, the wind cutting through your tunic despite the sun peeking over the eastern hills. The view is clear. Rolling fields, dark forests, a few smoke columns in the distance, probably from farmsteads still tending their hearths. But no invaders, no bandits, no signs of an approaching siege. Small mercies. You pause to look over the battlements, thinking how easy it is to romanticize this place from afar. From up here, with the mist on the fields and the morning haze painting the trees gold, you could almost believe this was a dream worth chasing. Until you notice the dried blood on the stonework where someone fell last week. Yeah, romance over. Now, let's throw in a fact to make this less depressing. Medieval castles were marvels of defence architecture. Moats, drawbridges, arrow slits, murder holes and reinforced gates were designed not just to repel attackers, but to terrify them. Every hallway could be a trap, every tower a last stand. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of strategic nightmares. Quirky side note, some castles had built-in garderobes, tiny stone toilets that emptied straight down the outer wall. In times of siege, that made waste disposal easy. In theory. In practice, the smell was its own form of defence. It might not stop a battering ram, but it could ruin a knight's day in seconds. After your circuit of the walls, you're sent to inspect the living quarters. That term is generous. It implies warmth, comfort, perhaps the faint scent of something baked. Instead, what you get is a series of cramped, dark rooms with slanted floors, cracked windows and straw bedding that's seen more fleas than daylight. You push open doors carefully, checking that no one's collapsed inside. A few servants nod as you pass, but most are curled up under blankets, avoiding you like you're carrying the plague. Honestly, you could be. As you check the last of the rooms, you notice something unsettling. The walls, they're sweating, not metaphorically. The stones are damp with condensation, as if the building itself is anxious. The hall is so cold your breath fogs in front of you, but the walls are clammy. You make a note to report it, though you know Bernard will just grunt and tell you to focus on your sword grip. That's when you reach the bottom of the north tower, the one used for prisoners and storage. You're not supposed to go in without permission, but the door is ajar. You hesitate, then push it open. Inside, it's dark, dusty. The air is thick with mildew and the faint, sour smell of old wine. You call out. No answer. You step inside. Your boots crunch over loose stone and what might be broken crockery. There's an old rack of armour in the corner rusted through, and a few crates sealed with wax-stamped lids. One has burst open, revealing a pile of dried fish. Another holds old scrolls and a tarnished goblet. You spot movement in the shadows and raise your hand instinctively, but it's just a rat, dragging what looks like someone's fingerbone. Lovely. You leave quickly, sealing the door behind you and promising yourself you'll never mention it again. Some secrets deserve to stay in the dark. Here's a debate scholars still kick around like a well-worn skull. Were castles truly livable, or just military bunkers with nice banners? Some say the nobility lived in luxury, with tapestries, cushioned seats, and roaring fires. Others point out the cold, the damp, the endless drafts, and the constant rat problem. The truth probably falls somewhere in between. Better than a peasant's hut, sure, but only if you ignore the fungus growing on your ceiling and the ghost stories in your pantry. You return to the yard just in time to get pulled into another round of supply inventory. The stores are low, with travel restricted and trade at a standstill thanks to dysentery paranoia. You're counting sacks of grain like they're gold bars. Salted fish, onions, root vegetables. Every crumb matters now. You help haul barrels into the cellar, then stack firewood until your shoulders ache. Dinner is meagre again. You chew slowly, trying not to think about Roger's empty bed or the way the walls felt like they were breathing. Henrietta rests on your boot like a paperweight, warm and feathered, her usual honks replaced with soft, thoughtful clucks. As the fire burns low in the hall, you glance up at the stonework and realise something. Castles aren't just built to keep enemies out, they also keep fear in. It's in the cracks, the echo of footsteps in empty corridors, the silence between heartbeats when the wind howls just right. You understand now why old knights are always a little twitchy. You crawl into bed, blanket pulled up to your chin, and try to sleep with your back to the wall. Not because you're scared. Okay, maybe a little because you're scared. You should have known something was wrong the moment you saw the boar. Not the actual boar, mind you, that would have been fine, even a little exciting, but the roasted one. The centrepiece of tonight's feast. laid out on the trestle table in the great hall like a tribute to the gods of indigestion. Its mouth is stuffed with apples, its back is glazed with honey, and its eyes are still in. That last bit feels unnecessary. Sir Bernard declares it a celebration. The worst of the illness has passed, the castle is stable, no one's died today, so naturally it's time to throw a party and test fate. You and the other squires aren't invited to sit, of course. You'll be serving, again, holding platters, pouring wine, and trying not to drop anything on someone important enough to have you flogged. Still, the smell of actual roasted meat, not salted fish or suspicious cabbage, is enough to make your stomach ache with longing. The hall is filled with music, laughter, and the sharp clink of metal goblets. Noblemen bellow across the table about old campaigns and broken treaties. Bard plays something cheerful on a lute, possibly with only 2 working strings. It's raucous, chaotic, and, admit it, a little magical. You weave through the crowd with a jug of watered wine, dodging elbows and the occasional wandering dog. One knight claps you on the back so hard you nearly lose your balance. Another demands you refill his cup 3 times in a row. Your feet ache, your arms burn, and you can already feel grease soaking into your sleeves. And then someone coughs. It's not the delicate kind of cough you can blame on wine going down the wrong way. It's harsh, wet, and it keeps going. Heads turn. A servant girl steps back. The nobleman who coughed, Lord Haverwick, you think, waves a hand as if to brush it off, but you see the red in his napkin. The moment shivers through the hall. Just like that, the illusion of safety snaps. Sir Bernard stands. His eyes scan the crowd like a wolf assessing a herd. He gestures to a steward, who nods and quietly ushers Lord Haverwick out a side door. The music continues, but with less energy now. A few guests murmur excuses and drift away. You're suddenly very aware of every breath, every shared goblet, every hand touching every platter of food. But Sir Bernard insists the feast go on. No one wants to admit fear so soon after declaring victory. So you keep pouring wine, serving meat, and pretending not to notice that people are now only pretending to enjoy themselves. Here's a historical fact to chew on along with your stolen sliver of boar fat. Medieval feasts weren't just about food, they were political theatre. Hosting a feast showed wealth, power, and control. Ending one early, especially for illness, could signal weakness. So even when sickness lingered in the air, the wine kept flowing. Weird detail? Some noble households used tasters, usually unlucky servants or even dogs, to sample food before it reached the lord's table. Not for flavour, but poison. And in at least one recorded case, the taster didn't die from poison, but from undercooked swan. You eye the stuffed pastries on the table and decide not to risk it. As the night drags on, people start getting too merry. Wine spills, a knight tries to challenge another to a duel over a game of dice. Someone knocks over a torch, nearly setting the tapestry on fire. You're cleaning sticky wine from the floor when a noblewoman throws up behind a pillar and just leaves. It's impressive in a way. Sir Bernard eventually calls for music to end and dismisses the guests before things unravel completely. You and the other squires are left to clean up. Again, the hall smells like meat, sweat, and spilled wine. You step over half-eaten loaves, pick bones out of the rushes on the floor, and wonder if all this pomp is really worth it. As you scrub down a bench, Henrietta appears beside you, looking annoyed that she wasn't invited. She pecks at a piece of discarded pie, tilts her head, then hops up onto the table like she owns it. You let her have her moment. Here's a scholarly debate to go with your midnight cleaning shift. Were medieval feasts really as grand and excessive as described in legends? Some say yes, they were extravagant affairs with dozens of courses, endless entertainment, and months of planning. Others argue that most were smaller, more practical, with just enough flair to impress without breaking the pantry. What historians do agree on is this. The line between celebration and disaster was razor thin. You finally finish after what feels like an eternity. Your tunic is stained, your legs are shaking, and you've accidentally cut yourself on a goblet rim while stacking dishes. You suck the blood off your finger and pretend not to care that your immune system is already under siege. You sneak a leftover roll from the serving tray and retreat to the courtyard. The air is cool, almost kind, and the stars are sharp and clear above the castle towers. You sit against the wall, chewing slowly, Henrietta nestled against your hip, content now that she's eaten something inappropriate. You realise how absurd it is. Last week you were shoveling human waste and praying you didn't die of dysentery. Tonight, you served roast boar to a room full of people pretending nothing was wrong. And tomorrow? Who knows? Maybe another raid, Maybe more sickness. Maybe you'll be mopping wine off stone floors until you die. That's the rhythm of castle life. Feast and famine, laughter and coughing fits, celebrations laced with fear. You stand, stretch your aching limbs, and walk back to the barracks in silence, Henrietta waddling behind you. As you reach the door, you glance back at the tower where Lord Haverwick disappeared. A candle still burns in the window. You hope it stays lit. The next morning, the candle in Lord Haverwick's window is gone. No one says it aloud, but everyone notices. At breakfast, the benches are emptier than usual. The pot of barley porridge sits half untouched. Someone mutters that a new cough's been heard in the kitchen wing. Sir Bernard walks into the hall looking like a man who hasn't slept, his eyes shadowed, and his hair more disorderly than usual. He says nothing about the feast, but everyone knows. The castle's pretending not to rot from the inside. You try to eat, but lose your appetite halfway through. The porridge tastes like glue, and the air feels heavy with things unspoken. Even Giles seems muted today, gnawing his crust of bread like he's chewing on his own thoughts. Henrietta isn't at your feet. She's taken to hiding in the hayloft and refuses to come down. You don't blame her. After the morning meal, you're summoned to the chapel, not for prayer, though you could probably use it, but to help clean it. Apparently a bishop is visiting. Yes, during an outbreak. Nothing says spiritual fortitude like dragging a holy man through a half-sick castle. Sir Bernard wants everything spotless. That means dusting wooden pews, scrubbing the altar rail, and polishing every candlestick until your arms cramp. You're handed a rag and a bucket of water so cold it makes your knuckles ache. You get to work, sliding your cloth over carved wood that's older than your great-grandfather. The chapel is quiet, eerily so. It's tucked into the castle's inner corner, its stained glass windows smeared with grime, its air thick with old incense and wet stone. A few prayer candles flicker. You don't dare light more. No one wants to risk fire right now. You pause at the front of the chapel, eyeing the stained glass of St. George slaying a dragon. You've always thought he looked far too calm. Maybe the dragon was sick. Maybe it sneezed and gave him a reason to fight. You stifle a laugh at your own thought. This is what your brain does now, makes weird jokes to keep from unravelling. Historical truth break. The church wasn't just a place of worship in medieval castles, it was a centre of power. Bishops and abbots wielded influence over land, law and kings. Nobles built private chapels in their keeps not only to worship but to show off their wealth and spiritual status. Inviting a bishop was like getting a royal influencer to drop by. Status, favour and hopefully salvation. Quirky footnote. There are records of some knights fighting duels in chapels, settling disputes at the altar. One even did it barefoot, claiming it was more humble. You glance at your own boots, streaked with ash and mud, and decide you're already halfway to humility yourself. Around midday, the bishop arrives. He comes with 2 attendants and a ceremonial crozier that looks more expensive than everything in the barracks combined. He's pale, fussy, and carries an embroidered handkerchief which he uses to dab his nose between every sentence. You're ordered to stand in the back as he inspects the chapel, muttering to Sir Bernard about the virtue of cleanliness and divine protection. You wonder if he's trying to bless the plague away with his scented scarf. Then he begins the real reason for his visit, collecting tithes. Yes, even during sickness, even while the castle trembles under the weight of its own silence. The bishop holds out a ledger, and Sir Bernard reluctantly hands over a pouch heavy with coin. You watch it pass hands and think about how many sacks of grain that would buy, how many boiled water buckets, how many actual healers, but you say nothing. You're a squire. Your opinion matters as much as the soot in the fireplace. Here's a scholarly debate that's been argued for centuries. Did the medieval church truly protect people, or did it exploit them? Some historians argue that monasteries and churches preserved knowledge, offered medical care, and kept communities together. Others point to the wealth hoarded by bishops, the indulgences sold like spiritual vending machines, and the taxes that bled villages dry. Standing here now, you see both truths, a sacred space, a silent transaction, a blessing with a price. The bishop finally leaves, muttering a final prayer at the altar before disappearing behind his veiled escort. You exhale, shoulders slumping, cloth still clenched in your hand like a weapon. The chapel suddenly feels colder, emptier, like it's sighed out its holiness with the bishop's departure. Sir Bernard tells you to finish cleaning, then report to the inner courtyard. A delivery has arrived. You make your way there slowly, trying not to trip on the wet stones. When you arrive, a cart piled with supplies is being unloaded. Barrels of vinegar, cloth bundles, dried beans, and miracle of miracles, soap. Real soap, wrapped in linen and smelling faintly of lye and something sweet, maybe lavender. You're tasked with distributing it to the barracks and kitchens. It's like handing out gold. The cook nearly cries. One of the guards kisses the bar of soap like it's a holy relic. You hand your share to Giles, who stares at it in wonder, before muttering, "Maybe now I'll finally wash my knees." Progress. Dinner that night is better than expected. Some kind of thick stew with actual flavour and a side of rye bread that doesn't chip a tooth. The fire crackles in the hearth. The squires talk a little more, laugh in short bursts. There's no mention of Lord Haverwick, no mention of the bishop's visit. Everyone just eats. Afterward, you sneak out to the courtyard with Henrietta, who's finally come down from her hayloft exile. She hops beside you, head bobbing, and pecks at your boot like she's testing the water. You sit by the old stone well, soap in hand, and start to scrub your sleeves. Not because anyone asked, just because you can. You look up at the stars, they're still there, distant and burning, as if nothing down here matters. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe all your training and fear and sweat is just noise in the grand hum of the universe. Or maybe, just maybe, cleaning your tunic beside a sassy goose under the night sky is what makes it all matter. You don't know, but for now, you're still here. The next morning starts with a scream, not one of those "Roger stepped on a rake again" screams. This is high-pitched, echoing, and absolutely drenched in panic. You bolt upright in your bunk, nearly knocking Henrietta off your chest. She honks, equally startled, flutters to the floor, and hurries toward the door like she's heading to file a complaint. You leap into your boots, no time for laces, and rush out into the courtyard. A cluster of people are already gathered near the herb garden, wide-eyed and whispering. You elbow your way through the crowd and freeze when you see what they're looking at. A cow, or at least what used to be one. It lies sprawled on its side, eyes open and glassy, its tongue hanging out like a banner of doom. Flies are already gathering, and a dark stain pools around its belly. The cow's body is bloated, twisted unnaturally, and reeking of something foul and chemical. Sister Maylie stands nearby, arms crossed, face grim. Sir Bernard arrives, takes one look, and curses under his breath. Then the whispers begin. Witchcraft! You feel it ripple through the crowd like wind through dry grass. No one says it loudly, but the word spreads anyway. It's too sudden, too unnatural, too cursed. You'd laugh if it weren't for the tension building in your chest. You glance at the stone wall where someone just scrawled a charm in chalk. Someone else drops to their knees and begins praying loudly. A third blames it on a servant girl who tripped over a horseshoe last week, because of course, why not? Sir Bernard tries to contain the panic, barking orders to move the cow's carcass and clear the courtyard. But the seed's been planted. People are already watching each other differently. Suspicion blooms like mould in the damp. You're ordered to help haul the cow's body away. You and 4 others roll it onto a stretcher. Well, more like a big warped door, and drag it out past the garden and toward the compost pits. The smell is appalling. One of the younger squires vomits before you even make it halfway. You press a cloth over your nose and try to breathe through your mouth. Here's your historical fact for the day. In the medieval mind, unexplainable events like sick animals or spoiled harvests were often blamed on supernatural causes. Witches, demons, evil eyes. If someone's cow died, and they remembered a neighbour giving them the side-eye last week, that neighbour might soon find themselves tied to a post and accused of conjuring devils through soup ingredients. Today's fringe fact? In some parts of Europe, animals were legally tried for crimes. That's not a joke. Pigs were dragged before courts for attacking children. Cows were put on trial for damaging crops, the most bizarre example. A rooster once faced trial for allegedly laying an egg, considered proof of witchcraft. They executed the rooster for being productive. Back at the castle, the tension gets worse. That afternoon, the cook refuses to use parsley because it's a summoning herb. A stable boy is found whispering over a dead mouse and gets slapped so hard he forgets his name. Giles insists he saw a shadow move through the orchard at sunrise. You remind him that it's called morning and he tells you to watch your back just in case. Then it happens. The servant girl, her name's Mila, and she's one of the laundress. Sweet, soft-spoken, and absolutely not capable of harming anything larger than a ladybug. She's brought before Sir Bernard under the accusation of maleficium, sorcery. Why? because she was seen collecting herbs near the outer wall and muttering to herself. That's it. That's the evidence. She's pale and shaking as Bernard questions her. You stand in the back, fists clenched, heart pounding. You've seen Mila nearly faint when a rooster jumped at her. You've also seen her stitch a sleeve back together with one hand while holding hot soup in the other. If anyone here is magical, it's Sister Meles, who can clean an open wound while chewing on an onion and judging everyone in the room. Bernard doesn't convict her, he's not a fool, but he does issue a warning to everyone. No unauthorized herb gathering, no chanted words, and for heaven's sake, no frogs in buckets. Still, the damage is done. Mila disappears from the laundry hall. People stop talking to her. You try to say hello later that day, and she turns away, eyes down, like she's waiting for the sky to fall. Here's a scholarly debate that might make your brain twitch. How seriously did medieval folks really take witchcraft? Some say it was overblown, that mass hysteria peaked later during the Renaissance. Others argue that fear of magic and curses was always simmering, especially in tight communities where the unexplained had to be explained somehow. In other words, if your cow dies and you don't know why, someone must have cursed it. End of story. That night the castle feels smaller. Shadows stretch longer. The torchlight in the halls flickers more than usual. Henrietta won't even perch near the window. She curls up under your bed, softly clucking like she's humming a defensive chant. You lie there, staring at the beams, wondering how quickly humans can turn on each other when scared. You're not afraid of witches. You're afraid of fear itself, how fast it spreads, how loud it gets, how convincing it becomes. One dead cow and the whole castle starts looking sideways. You drift off with a prayer that tomorrow no one finds a dead bird or hears a strange whisper in the garden. Because if they do, you have no doubt someone else, and someone innocent, is going to burn for it. And it won't be the Parsleys' fault. The sun barely crests the hills when Sir Bernard announces it. Tax day. You're halfway through your morning routine, trying to lace your boots before Henrietta pecks them clean off your feet, when the news reaches the barracks. There's a groan so loud it shakes dust from the ceiling. Not because you're the one being taxed. You're a squire, and squires are basically human wheelbarrows. No, you're groaning because you know what this means. Inventory, escort duty, lots of counting, and getting screamed at by peasants who already hate you. Sir Bernard assigns you to the ledgers, which is rich considering you can barely write your name without flipping a letter. But he says you have honest eyes. You suspect that's knight code for less likely to steal turnips when no one's watching. So off you go, riding with a small party of knights and castle clerks down to the nearest village. A sad muddy patch of huts, thatch, and smoke where the chickens walk with purpose and the pigs outnumber the children. The road is rutted and wet, the sky overcast, and Thunderbolt, yes, he's still your horse, is grumpier than ever. He nearly throws you twice before you even reach the outer gate. By the time you arrive, a small crowd has already formed in the square. You can feel their eyes on you as you dismount. The villagers stand in silence, faces blank, arms folded. Not one smiles. They know what's coming. They've seen it before. You're not a hero here. You're the guy helping count how many eggs they can spare before their children starve. You take a seat beside the clerk, who smells like boiled quills and anxiety, and open the ledger. It's a miracle you can read it. Most of it is chicken scratch Latin, with ink blotches the size of walnuts. The first villager approaches, an old man with a bent back and a face like dried leather. He places a basket on the ground with 5 onions and a single turnip. 3 more turnips short, the clerk mutters. He owed 8. The old man says nothing, just stares at the ground like it might offer better terms. You glance at his boots, threadbare, at his hands, knotted, calloused. You want to let it slide. But the clerk shakes his head. Note it down, penalty applied. You mark it, you hate yourself a little. Historical fact for your misery. Taxes in medieval times came in all forms. Coin, crops, livestock, labour, you name it. If it could be counted, it could be taxed. Lords taxed peasants for using mills, crossing bridges, fishing rivers, even marrying off daughters. Knights collected, the church collected. Sometimes both at the same time, and if the harvest was bad, too bad. The tax still came. Quirky historical footnote. In some parts of Europe, peasants were taxed for owning beehives. Imagine someone demanding 2 jars of honey and a portion of your bees every spring. You'd think people made that up, till you see it written in a 1,000-year-old scroll and realise, yes, the bees were part of the economy. Back in the square, a woman brings forward a goat. She looks like she hasn't slept in days. Her lips are pale, her skirt frayed. She doesn't speak, just waits while the clerk inspects the goat, then waves her off. You see her shoulders drop as she walks away, holding back tears. The goat was likely her last asset. It'll be on your lord's table by sunset. Then come the complaints. My roof leaks. The harvest failed. The well dried out. My son died last winter and no one's lifted a finger. You nod. You record. You say I'm sorry so many times it stops meaning anything. You're not a monster, but you're wearing the monster's uniform, and that's all that matters. Then it escalates. A younger man steps forward, barefoot, wild-eyed. He slams down a bundle of herbs and says, "Take this and choke on it." Sir Bernard, watching from his horse nearby, stiffens. The clerk looks at you, pen frozen in midair. The man spits on the ground. You're ready for Bernard to dismount and teach the guy the value of obedience with a sword pommel. But surprisingly, he doesn't. He just lifts his chin and says, "Add his name to the punishment rolls." Then he turns his horse and trots away like it's just another day at the office. The rest of the taxes are collected in silence. No more outbursts, no more protests, just shame and dust and the soft bleating of that one goat as it's tied to a cart. On the ride back, Thunderbolt decides to veer off the path to chase a butterfly. You let him. You're too tired to argue. The cart rattles behind you, filled with produce that isn't yours, bound for people who already have more than they need. You think about how knights are supposed to defend the helpless, protect the innocent, but no one tells you what to do when the people you're defending have to pay for the privilege. They don't teach you how to smile when handing over someone else's grain to a lord who calls it tribute. They don't tell you what to write when there's nothing left to give. Here's a scholarly debate for you. Was the feudal system a fair trade? Protection in exchange for loyalty and taxes? Some historians say yes. It was an early version of structure, order, shared responsibility. Others argue it was nothing more than legalized exploitation dressed up in armor and ceremony. You lean toward the latter. After today, it's hard not to. Back at the castle, you help unload the goods into the storerooms. You carry sacks that you know were handed over in desperation. You stack onions that belonged in someone's winter stew. You try not to look Sir Bernard in the eye. He's humming to himself. Maybe he doesn't feel it. Maybe he stopped feeling it a long time ago. You eat a meagre dinner in the barracks, even though you're surrounded by food. The irony is thick. Henrietta hops onto your knee, her feathers fluffing in irritation. You offer her a small crust, which she pecks once, then tosses aside like it offends her. You're with her on that. That night you lie awake staring at the ceiling, the numbers from the ledger etched behind your eyelids. The names, the penalties, the goat. Knighthood, they said, would be noble. You'd uphold justice, fight evil, stand tall in shining armour. Turns out sometimes you just steal from peasants in the name of order and hope the next guy doesn't punch you in the face. You wake up in pain. Again. At this point, pain is just another part of your morning routine, somewhere between get kicked by Henrietta and chew bread until it stops being sharp. But this pain is different. This isn't muscle stiffness or saddle rash. It's your right arm, hot, tight, and humming with discomfort. You sit up and peel back your tunic sleeve, expecting maybe a bruise or an insect bite. What you see is worse. It's swollen, deep red, angry. The flesh around your elbow looks like it's plotting something. You poke it, immediately regret it, and mutter a few words that would get you slapped if Father Bertram were within earshot. It's from yesterday, you realise. Hauling sacks from the tax cart, then stacking firewood, then that surprise sparring match Bernard called character building. You took a blow to the arm, laughed it off, and now it feels like your elbow is hosting a rebellion. You head to the healer. Sister Malis eyes the swelling and mutters, "Idiot," before dragging you into her cramped stone hut. She smears something brown and unidentifiable on your arm that smells like boiled leeks and despair, then wraps it in a bandage that might have been part of someone's undershirt last week. "You'll live," she says, not quite encouragingly, "unless it goes black. Then I cut it off." You try to laugh, she doesn't. You leave quickly. But of course, there's no rest. You're still expected to train. Bernard sees your limp and says, "Oh good, you're warmed up. Elric just shoves a blunted sword into your good hand and tells you to pair off with Giles. Great, Giles, he's grinning. Of course he is. He's been in a strangely good mood ever since you let him borrow that soap last week. Maybe he's just thrilled about his clean knees. Maybe he's excited to bash yours in. You square off in the yard surrounded by other squires, everyone moving through forms with tired precision. Giles lunges. You parry off balance because your arm throbs every time you adjust your grip. You deflect a few more blows, then try to counter. He sidesteps easily and slaps your shoulder with the flat of his blade. Come on, he says, teasing. You've got to fight better than that. I've seen Henrietta charge harder. She has, to be fair. You grit your teeth and swing again. Giles blocks, pivots, and catches you in the ribs with a perfect, painless but humiliating tap. You fall back, frustrated, and raise your sword again, only for Elric to bark, "Stop, switch partners!" Saved by the bell, kind of. Here's your historical fact for the day. Despite the glorified image of knights in armour clashing like gods, most real battles were brutal, messy, and rarely fair. Injuries were constant, broken bones, dislocated joints, crushed fingers. And if you didn't die on the battlefield, chances were good you'd lose something eventually. A finger, a tooth, an ear, maybe your whole arm. Chivalry didn't include health insurance. Weird historical twist. Some knights had preferred wounds. Scars on the chest or arms were seen as honourable. Wounds on the back, cowardice. So if you ran and got hit from behind, that scar didn't just hurt, it branded you. In some cases, knights went out of their way to fight face forward, even if it meant dying faster. Because reputation, apparently, was worth bleeding for. Training ends with a round of archery. You're not half bad, partly because you don't need to use your swollen elbow much. You loose 5 arrows, 2 of which hit the target. Giles hits 4 and makes sure you know about it. You mutter something about beginner's luck and shuffle off to the barracks, arm still pulsing, and then, just when you think the day can't possibly get worse, it does. Sir Bernard announces that tomorrow's schedule includes live weapon sparring in full armour, with real swords, not sharpened thankfully, but real. He wants the squires to experience the weight of fear, as he puts it. Translation: someone's getting seriously hurt. You spend the rest of the day sharpening your blade, under supervision of course, and practicing moves with wooden dummies. Your arm makes each swing feel like dragging a door through molasses. You're not worried about dying tomorrow. Not really, but losing a finger? Maybe a toe? That seems very plausible. Dinner is surprisingly good. Stewed lentils with herbs and a slice of cheese that doesn't smell like feet. You savour it. Henrietta gets a crumb and looks at you like she's finally proud. As you eat, you overhear 2 older squires talking. One of them, Tomlin, is missing the top joint of his left pinky. He claims it happened in training. Someone else says it was frostbite from the winter siege 2 years ago. Either way, the stub is real. He waves it around like a cautionary tale. You try not to imagine what part of you won't survive tomorrow. Here's the scholarly debate to mull over while chewing. How often did knights actually lose limbs in combat or training? Some say it was rare. Armour was surprisingly effective at deflecting blows. Others argue that battlefield medicine was so primitive that even minor injuries often led to amputation. Infection, poor hygiene, and lack of understanding about internal injuries meant losing a limb wasn't just possible. It was expected. You return to your bunk, arm wrapped in a new poultice that smells like someone boiled garlic with manure. You lie there, trying not to jostle your elbow, staring at the ceiling and thinking about your fingers. You really like your fingers. All of them. Even the weirdly bent one. Henrietta hops onto your chest and stares down at you. She doesn't honk, just sits there, warm and silent like a small feathered bodyguard. You whisper, "If I lose my sword hand, I'm blaming Giles." She blinks. You fall asleep, cradling your bandaged arm like it's made of glass. Tomorrow you might lose a limb, but tonight at least you still have them all. You wake up before the bell, not because you're eager, but because your elbow feels like it's full of bees and possibly on fire. You flex your fingers, carefully. Everything's still attached, swollen, stiff but movable. You take that as a small win. Henrietta's already awake and sitting on your chest, staring into your soul like she knows what kind of day it's going to be. Full armour sparring, with real swords. No one's talking about anything else. You dress slowly, slipping into your padded arming doublet like a condemned man into his funeral clothes. The fabric is damp with last night's sweat. and it clings in all the wrong places. You pull on your breeches, strap your belt tight, and hobble over to where your armour is stored. It's stacked just where you left it, still smeared with dust and pine sap from yesterday's drills. The squires gather in the yard, quiet, tense, adjusting straps and muttering last-minute prayers. Sir Bernard stands nearby, polishing his sword with the kind of casual energy that says, "I've definitely done worse than this before breakfast." Elric is already in armour, shouting reminders over the clanking of metal. No strikes to the head, no stabbing, aim for the chest, limbs and pride. You gear up with help from Tomlin, who's grumbling about how the last time he did full contact he cracked a rib and no one noticed until he couldn't sneeze for 2 weeks. Comforting. Historical reality check, full armour sparring was rare and dangerous. When it did happen, it was usually with blunted weapons or under careful supervision. Even so, injuries were common. Bruised ribs, dislocated shoulders, crushed fingers. The armour protected you, yes, but only up to a point. Beyond that, pain. And here's your quirky side fact. Knights sometimes practiced in wooden armour, especially during festivals or mock tournaments. Imagine running around in a tree costume, trying to whack your friend with a fake axe. It happened. Humanity's always had a flair for dramatic nonsense. Back to your own dramatic nonsense. Sir Bernard calls your name. You step forward into the ring, fully armoured, your helmet clanking slightly as you move. The visor narrows your vision to a thin slit. Everything feels heavy, muffled. You breathe through your mouth because your nose is already dripping sweat. Across from you stands Giles, also armoured, his sword in hand and that insufferable half-grin visible beneath his visor. Of course it's Giles. Elric steps between you, nods once, then backs away. Begin! You don't move at first, neither does Giles. You both size each other up like cautious cats in expensive tin cans. Then he lunges. You parry, barely. The blow rattles up your injured arm and explodes somewhere near your shoulder blade. You grunt, but manage to swing in return, clipping his thigh plate with a clang. It's not enough to count. He swings again, this time a low sweep. You jump back, trip slightly, regain your footing. The fight goes on for what feels like hours, but is probably only a minute or two. You block, strike, absorb impact after impact. Your sword feels heavier with each swing, your arms are burning, your elbow howling. You take a blow to the ribs that knocks the wind out of you and another to your knee that sends you stumbling. But you don't fall, and then you land one. A clean hit, straight to Giles's chest plate. It rings out like a bell. He staggers back, surprised. The squires watching let out a collective "ooh" that fills your chest with something dangerously close to pride. But the moment's short-lived. Giles comes back with a wild overhead swing that catches your shoulder at an angle. It's not a disqualifying blow, but the force knocks you sideways. You crash to the ground and your armour clanging like dropped cookware. Your sword skitters away. "Match!" Elric calls. You lie there for a second, flat on your back, trying to breathe. Your ribs ache. Your arm feels like a sack of burning coals. You raise your hand, still attached, and wave weakly. Tomlin helps you up. "Not bad," he says. "You still got a nose. That's more than I had my first match." You unstrap your helmet, gasping cool air like it's a gift. Giles comes over, panting, helmet tucked under his arm. "Good hit," he says, then adds, "for a guy with a half-dead arm." You almost thank him, almost. You watch the rest of the matches from the shade, arms crossed over your chest, trying not to wince every time someone hits the ground. One squire walks away with a cracked wrist. Another can't lift his shield afterward. Elric nods approvingly and tells us all we're getting tougher. You're not sure if that's a compliment or a threat. Let's pause for a scholarly debate. How literate were knights, really? You've been wondering about it because every time Bernard hands you anything written, it's assumed someone else will read it for him. Some historians argue that by the later Middle Ages, many knights were educated, especially those of noble birth. Others insist most were functionally illiterate, focused more on war than words. You can read well enough to know that Giles's name is scribbled wrong in the duty roster. You don't correct it. That evening you're excused from chores because of your injury, which feels like a royal pardon. You sit in the corner of the courtyard, soaking your arm in a barrel of cold water and watching the sky go pink behind the castle towers. Henrietta waddles over and pecks your shin, annoyed at being ignored all day. You drop a crust of bread beside her. She eats it with deliberate, disapproving crunches. Dinner is quiet. Everyone's exhausted, bruised, limping. You eat slowly, each bite reminding you how lucky you are to still have your teeth. Giles nods at you once from across the table. You nod back. The truce feels temporary, but that's better than nothing. That night, you lie on your back with your arm elevated on a bundled tunic. The stars are visible through the narrow window above your bunk. You breathe, long and slow, trying not to move too much. You survived real sword training. You didn't lose a limb. You hit Giles square in the chest. That's enough. You wake up to bells, not the kind that mark training or mealtime, but the slow, deliberate toll of the chapel bell. A sound that only means one thing. Someone died. And not just someone, many someones. That bell doesn't ring once, it tolls 6 times before the first rooster crows. You sit up, bleary-eyed, arms stiff but still attached, and try to make sense of it. The barracks is already stirring. No one's talking, no jokes, no groaning, no Henrietta launching herself at someone's ankles. She's perched near the door, fluffing her feathers slowly, head cocked at the sound. Roger mutters, "Not again," under his breath as he pulls on his boots. You look at him, and for once, he doesn't meet your eyes. Outside, the air is cold and still. Too still. The kind of morning where the wind seems to be holding its breath. Sir Bernard meets you all in the yard, jaw clenched tight, his usual booming bark replaced with something quieter, measured. There's plague in the village. Your stomach drops. He doesn't say much more, he doesn't need to. Everyone knows what that word means. It's not just sickness, it's the sickness. The one whispered about in corners, the one the bishop claimed was a punishment, the one that turns a village into a graveyard in a matter of days. Quarantine begins immediately. The gates are sealed. No one leaves. No one enters. The village road is blocked by a cart turned sideways, with an old black flag hung from its top like a morbid sail. You're ordered to stay inside the castle walls unless otherwise directed. Training is suspended. Feasts are cancelled. Even the chapel is closed. Its doors barred like it's afraid of what's out there. And maybe it is. Historical fact incoming. The Black Death swept through Europe in waves, starting in the mid-14th century and returning regularly for centuries. It didn't just kill, it shattered economies, reordered societies and left behind folklore drenched in fear. Castles, towns, villages, no one was immune. It crept in through fleas, rats, bad air and trade routes. You never saw it coming until your neighbour dropped dead. Fringe fact, during outbreaks, some people believed plague was spread by looking at someone infected. Others carried posies of herbs and flowers stuffed into their clothing to ward off the smell. Thus, the nursery rhyme, "Ring around the rosy." You're not singing it. Not today. The castle falls into a slow-motion panic. People move in tight groups or not at all. Conversations drop off when anyone coughs. Sister Malis begins preparing plague bundles, herb sachets soaked in vinegar and hung in doorways. The kitchens burn rosemary and sage in bowls of hot coals, and no one touches the dogs. Even Henrietta gets side-eyed. Your job for the day? Wall patrol, again, but this time it's less about defence and more about observation. You're stationed near the North Watchtower with Giles, who is unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the tree line far below. You both spotted around midday. A figure walking the village road, alone, hooded, moving slowly, too slowly. You don't recognise them. You don't need to. The way they shuffle, the way they stop every few steps, it's not normal. You want to believe they're just tired, but then they collapse, face down in the dirt, maybe 50 yards from the blockade cart. You and Giles look at each other, but don't speak. A knight arrives minutes later and orders the body left alone. "No contact," he says. "Burn the road if we have to." Back inside, the castle begins preparing in earnest. The storage rooms are sealed. Extra guards are posted. Sir Bernard calls the squires to the hall and explains the new reality in his usual blunt tone. You do what you're told. You don't wander, and if you start coughing, you report to Malis and stay there. You do not lie. You believe him. He's not joking. That night you're sent to help reinforce the storeroom doors. Not because of plague, because of people. Panic makes even the loyal unpredictable. You hammer in heavy crossbeams, nail them down with iron spikes and sweat into your boots as dust curls in the torchlight. Giles works beside you, silent as a ghost. When you take a break and offer him your water skin, he nods but doesn't drink. He just sits on the floor and asks, "You think we're next?" You don't answer. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Did plague truly reshape the knightly class? Some say yes, so many noble heirs died that entire dynasties collapsed. Others argue that knights simply adapted, turning their fortresses into bunkers and using plague as another excuse to tighten control. Either way, it left a scar, not just on bodies but on institutions. After finishing your shift, you return to the barracks. No one is sleeping. Everyone is pretending to. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing down heavier than your armour ever did. Henrietta curls up near your feet, unusually quiet. She hasn't honked in hours. You think about the man on the road, about how fast it could spread, how it always starts slow, one cough, one fever, one village. You think about how your training never prepared you for this. No sword can kill a sickness. No shield can block a flea. You close your eyes and count your breaths. 1, 2, 3. Still alive. The next morning you lie in bed longer than usual, pretending to be asleep even though you're wide awake. You listen for the sounds of the barracks, shifting blankets, the scrape of boots, maybe Henrietta scratching at the floor. But the room is quieter than it should be. Too many bunks are empty. Too many voices are missing. You hear a soft cough from someone near the hearth and go still, holding your breath, as if that alone could save you. You eventually sit up, slowly, carefully. You stretch your arms, check your limbs like you're inventorying them. Still here, still working, no fever. Henrietta hops off your blanket and eyes you with something like concern. Or hunger. Hard to say. You throw her a crumb from last night's biscuit. She ignores it. There's a new notice nailed to the barracks door. Thick parchment, dark red wax seal. You and the remaining squires gather to read it, shivering in the early morning chill. Sir Bernard's handwriting is as aggressive as his personality. All squires are now part of the castle's internal wellness patrol, which sounds noble until you read the job description. You'll be delivering water, rotating chamber pots, assisting Sister Malis, and worst of all, collecting the dead. You're handed a cloth mask soaked in vinegar and told to tie it tightly. Don't breathe too deep, Malis warns, and for the love of all saints, don't touch your face. Your first assignment is to the stable ward. It was a stable once, now it's a makeshift infirmary. The straw is gone, replaced with rough pallets and blankets that look like they were dragged straight from the laundry pile. The sick lie shoulder to shoulder, barely moving. Some moan, others just stare. Sister Malis moves among them like a soldier on the patrol, barking orders, spooning medicine into reluctant mouths, slapping hands away from dirty bandages. She doesn't stop, doesn't blink. You stand in the corner with a bucket of clean water in a shaking hand. The first person who needs a drink is a boy, 12 maybe. His lips are cracked, his eyes wild. He tries to sit up, but he's too weak. You kneel and hold the cup to his lips. He sips once, then vomits. You jerk the bucket just in time to catch it. You nod. He nods. Then he lies back down like you're not even there. You spend the rest of the morning doing the same thing. Water, rinse, wipe, repeat. You don't look at faces too long. You don't ask names. You don't ask where they're from or who they lost. You just work, because if you stop moving, you might start thinking, and that's worse. Historical truth. Plague medicine was a mixture of guesswork and desperation. Treatments included crushed emeralds, ground-up frogs, and bleeding patients with leeches. Some healers believed the plague was a result of imbalanced humours and prescribed laxatives or enforced vomiting. Others used sweet-smelling herbs, hoping to purify the air. Some wore bird-beaked masks filled with spices. You get a rag soaked in vinegar and the hope that your luck holds out. Weird fact. In one French village, the townspeople buried plague victims with cheese wheels as fare for the afterlife. Maybe the idea was that if death came, at least you wouldn't be hungry. At midday, you help Sister Malis carry a body outside. It's light. Too light. A woman, maybe in her 40s, her hand still curled in fists. You don't look at her face. Malis wraps her in linen and leaves her near the chapel steps for the cart. Giles joins you an hour later. His eyes are red. He doesn't say much, just nods and grabs the other side of the water bucket. Together, you haul it back to the kitchen for more boiling. On the way, you pass the well. It's been covered. Too risky, apparently. A new one is being dug in the outer courtyard. Until then, all water must be boiled or drawn from rain barrels. You help cover one of the barrels with cloth to keep out birds. Henrietta watches from the wall, unusually still. You think about building her a tiny vinegar-soaked mask. When you return to the barracks that night, 3 bunks are empty. You know their names, but you don't say them. No one does. Instead, Tomlin leads a quiet prayer. Everyone bows their heads. Even Sir Bernard stands in the doorway, helmet tucked under one arm. Afterward, dinner is served in silence, lentil mush, no salt. You eat slowly, your stomach half turning. The smell of vinegar clings to your hands. Henrietta pecks your boot once, then nestles under the bench like she's done for days. Here's the scholarly debate to chew on while you pretend to eat. How much did people actually understand about the plague? The church said it was divine punishment. Scientists, what few existed, blamed the stars or earthquakes or the alignment of Saturn. Some physicians guessed right about rats and fleas, but their ideas were buried under superstition and fear. Most people just assumed they were cursed and hoped the smell of basil would save them. You sleep on your side, back to the door. You keep your mask close in case you need it during the night. Your bandaged elbow throbs again, but the fever hasn't come, not yet. You lie there for a long time listening to the castle breathe, every creak of wood, every scuffle of boots outside, every cough, especially the coughs. You count them like stars. You survived another day. Barely. You don't know how many more you'll get. You wake up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the sort that comes with a gentle breeze and chirping birds. No, this silence is heavy, unnatural, the kind that creeps under the doorframe and curls around your chest. Even Henrietta doesn't greet the morning with her usual squawk and stomp across your pillow. She just sits beside your bunk, feathers puffed, watching the door like she's expecting it to open and swallow someone whole. You rise slowly, every movement measured. You listen. No coughs, no footsteps. Just the dull hiss of wind through the cracks in the stone walls. Outside the barracks, the castle looks wrong. It's not empty. There are still people moving about, still smoke curling from the kitchens, still guards pacing the ramparts. But everything is slower, softer, as if the castle itself is trying not to draw attention. Sir Bernard finds you before breakfast. His usual bark has faded into a gravelly murmur. "You're needed in the chapel," he says. "Now." You don't ask questions, you just go. The chapel is lit with dozens of candles, their smoke thick in the air, clinging to the low rafters like whispers. The scent of wax and burning herbs stings your nose. Father Bertram stands at the altar, pale and gaunt, muttering a litany under his breath. His hands tremble over the holy book. Sister Malis is in the back corner with 3 other squires, including Giles, kneeling around something on the floor. You join them. It's a man, a knight, not one from your keep. You would remember the silver lion on his chest plate. He's breathing barely. His eyes flutter open, then shut again. His skin is slick with sweat. You can see the swollen lumps beneath his arms, like twisted apples trying to break free from his flesh. Buboes. You've heard the word whispered in corners. You never expected to see them up close. Sister Malis doesn't look up. We found him on the forest path. He was trying to reach the keep for help, collapsed just past the orchard. She wrings out a cloth and places it on the knight's forehead. He's not going to make it. You nod, throat too tight to speak. Here's your historical truth bomb for today. The Bubonic plague, named for those grotesque swollen lymph nodes, buboes, was one of the deadliest forms of plague. Coupled with high fever, vomiting and delirium, it killed within days. In some cities, the death rate hit 50 to 70%. Some victims died within 24 hours of showing symptoms. And here's your creepy medieval detail. In parts of Europe, bells were rung constantly during plague outbreaks. Not for the dead, but to drive away the sickness. The theory? Sound could cleanse the air, so the living rang bells all day and night, hoping to terrify the disease out of their homes. It didn't work, but it probably made the last few days of life very noisy. Back in the chapel, the knight shudders once, breath catching. Malis leans in, whispers something you can't hear. His eyes flicker open one last time, then nothing. Father Bertram steps forward, performs a blessing. You and the others lift the body, gently, carefully, and carry it out the side door toward the orchard. That's where they're burying the plague dead now. Away from the chapel, away from the people. You dig the grave in silence. It takes hours. The ground is cold and stubborn. Your arms burn as Giles works beside you, jaw clenched, hands blistered. When the grave is ready, you lower the body in, cover it with linen and begin filling the earth. No prayers, no family, just dirt. Afterward, you wash your hands in vinegar and ash, Your fingernails are black, your knuckles are raw, you don't feel clean, not even close. That evening, there's no dinner. The kitchens are locked, 2 cooks collapsed earlier, and Sir Bernard doesn't want to risk spreading the infection. The squires are told to ration their own stores. You have half a biscuit and a piece of dried apple. You chew slowly, trying to make it feel like a meal. Henrietta accepts a small scrap and settles into your lap. For once, she's not greedy, just warm. Here's a scholarly debate to gnaw on while your stomach grumbles. Did the plague strengthen religious devotion or destroy it? Some historians argue it drove people closer to faith, filling chapels, inspiring desperate acts of piety. Others say it shattered belief. Why pray to a god who lets children die in their sleep? Both sides are right. Some turned to fasting, pilgrimage and flagellation. Others turned away from the church altogether. You think about Bertram's shaking hands, about the knight's last breath. You crawl into your bunk without bothering to undress. The straw pokes your side, your limbs ache from digging, from lifting, from trying not to crumble. You close your eyes, you dream of bells. Not cheerful ones. Funeral bells, one after the other, rolling like thunder, growing louder with every toll. You wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. You check your armpits. No lumps. Yet. You wake up cold, not from weather or wind or someone stealing your blanket in the night. No, this is the kind of cold that crawls up your spine from the inside out. The kind that makes you open your eyes and scan your arms, your chest, your hands, just to make sure your skin still belongs to you. You're fine, for now, but fine doesn't mean what it used to. Now it just means not coughing yet. The castle feels smaller every day. The halls are quiet, the torches burn lower, and there are fewer footsteps echoing down the stone corridors. Rooms that were once bustling with voices are empty. Benches that once creaked under the weight of laughter now sit dusty and still. You dress without thinking, your tunic hangs loose, probably because you've lost weight. Food's scarce, and no one has the appetite anyway. Even Giles looks gaunt. The glimmer in his eye has dulled, replaced by something sharper, more distant. You pass each other in the corridor and nod without speaking. It feels like talking too much might waste energy you'll need later. You're assigned to courtyard detail. Again, not guard duty, not training, not errands, just walking the courtyard, keeping an eye out for irregularities, which, as far as you can tell, means watching for signs that someone's collapsed in the cabbage patch or trying to sneak out past the gates. You patrol with your vinegar cloth tucked into your collar and your hand never far from the dagger on your belt. Not because of invaders, but because of panic. You spot one of the laundresses burning linens in a copper fire pot near the laundry steps. She works methodically, dropping each cloth in like it insulted her, watching it curl into ash before picking up the next. You recognise the stains on some of them. Dark brown, too old to be wine. You keep walking. Historical fact to anchor this misery. During plague outbreaks, castles and towns would often burn anything that had touched the sick. Clothes, bedding, even entire rooms. Some cities went further, torching in entire neighbourhoods just to halt the spread. If fire couldn't cleanse the body, maybe it could cleanse the space. Fear made people ruthless. Strange but true aside, there are records of medieval people killing their own animals, believing they carried the sickness in their breath. Dogs, cats, even chickens were slaughtered, not out of cruelty, but desperation. You glance at Henrietta and vow silently that if anyone so much as looks at her sideways, you'll fight them with a spoon if you have to. By midday, the sun breaks through the clouds, pale and watery like it's sick too. You sit by the well, the new one, still shallow but serviceable, and watch a pair of squires fill buckets under Melis's supervision. She's moving slower now, limping a little. You wonder if anyone else has noticed. Then you see the gatehouse stir. A rider. Everyone freezes. You, the squires, the guards. The rider's horse is thin, ribs showing, eyes wide with fatigue. The man slumped in the saddle is cloaked, face hidden. The guards raise spears. The rider lifts a hand slowly, holds something out. A scroll, sealed in green wax. A messenger. Sir Bernard appears moments later, flanked by 2 knights. The rider dismounts and sways, almost falling before the knights catch him. The scroll is handed off, and the man is taken inside. You don't see him again. Rumours spread faster than disease. Some say this message came from the royal court. Others swear it's from a neighbouring lord offering refuge. One of the cooks claims it's a death toll. Another says it's an order for reinforcements. You hear all of this while sharpening your blade for the 6th time that week, because when there's nothing left to do, you polish your weapons and pretend it matters. Later, Sir Bernard addresses the squires. Not all of them, just those still able to stand. You count 9. There were 17 last month. "We've been summoned," he says. "The nearby barony has lost its knights to illness. They've requested aid, men, horses, steel." He doesn't say what you're all thinking. Why us? Why send squires? Because you're what's left. You're given until morning to prepare, your gear must be ready, your weapons sharp, your minds clear. Clear, that's a good one. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight. How often were young squires pulled into full combat before they were ready? Some say it was rare, that lords protected their trainees until they could be properly knighted. Others argue that war and plague changed everything. When your army's dying, you don't have the luxury of waiting. You need bodies. And squires? They had 2 arms, 2 legs and a weapon. Close enough. After the announcement, you pack in silence. You oil your sword, check your buckles, restuff your bedroll. Henrietta watches from your bunk, head tilted, feathers fluffed. She doesn't know you might not be coming back. Or maybe she does. Dinner is a silent affair, cold beans and old cheese. You chew without tasting. Across the room, Giles meets your eyes. He lifts his cup slightly. You do the same. No toast, no words, just acknowledgement. That night you don't sleep much. You lie in your bunk, listening to the fire crackle in the hearth and the occasional creak of the rafters above. The wind slips through the shutters and brushes your face like cold fingers. Henrietta climbs onto your chest and settles in. You don't move her. You think about what tomorrow means, leaving the castle, facing battle, breathing air that isn't steeped in fear and vinegar, and maybe never coming back. But you also think about what it means to stay, to rot here, to wait for another bell to ring, another friend to vanish in the night. You'd rather take your chances with steel than shadows. At least a sword has the courtesy to show its edge. You ride out at dawn. The sun rises behind the castle like a dying ember, casting long shadows that stretch across the fields and make every tree look like it's hiding something. The air is crisp, almost sharp, and the grass is slick with dew. You'd call it beautiful if you weren't riding off to potentially die for a barony you've never seen, and lords who wouldn't remember your name even if you shouted it while on fire. Thunderbolt is surprisingly cooperative this morning. He doesn't try to buck you, he doesn't bite anyone, he just trudges forward, head low, hooves squishing through the wet earth like he's seen this movie before and knows it ends badly. There are 9 of you. 9 squires, 2 knights, and 1 banner, green with a gold cross, borrowed from the barony you're riding to help. Sir Bernard doesn't come. He's too valuable. You, apparently, are not. So Elric leads the column, his cloak stiff in the breeze, eyes always scanning the horizon. The silence between hoofbeats is thicker than the fog. You've never ridden this far from the castle before. At first, the countryside is familiar. Rolling hills, patches of tilled fields, small cottages with shuttered windows. But the further you go, the quieter it gets. Villages lie still, their doors barred, smoke curling lazily from a few chimneys. You pass one farm where every animal pen is empty. No pigs, no chickens. Just a broken wheelbarrow tipped on its side and a child's doll abandoned in the mud. No one speaks until mid-morning when Giles mutters, "Where is everyone?" Elric hears him, but doesn't answer. Around midday you reach the edge of the barony's lands. The main road winds into a shallow valley, where you see your first real sign of trouble. A barricade, roughly built from wagons, carts, broken fences. It's not there to keep anything out, it's there to keep things in. There's a man sitting in the middle of the road. Just sitting. Legs stretched out, arms limp at his sides. He doesn't move when you approach. Elric halts the group, raises a hand. "Wait." You stop 10 paces away. The man looks up. His face is gaunt, sunken, his lips cracked. There's a red mark on his neck. He doesn't speak, just raises his hand slowly and points toward the village beyond the barricade. "Gone," he whispers. "They're all gone." Elric dismounts, walks forward alone, speaks with the man quietly. You can't hear the words. When he returns, his face is grim. "We ride around," he says. "No contact." So you skirt the village. The fields beyond it are overgrown, the barns are collapsing. You think you see movement in one of the windows, but it could just be wind. Historical fact break. Entire towns were lost to the plague, their populations so decimated that they were never repopulated. In some places, the only record of their existence is a name in a tax ledger and a skeleton beneath a church floor. The countryside became a patchwork of ghost villages, silent, overgrown, and slowly erased by time. Here's your eerie little detail of the day. Some travellers during plague times carried death coins, small tokens inscribed with prayers or charms, meant to bribe the reaper or mark their bodies if found. You don't have one. Closest thing you've got is a splintered wood token Giles gave you last winter, carved with a crude chicken on one side and a goose on the other. He said it was for luck. You're not sure what it means, but it's still in your pocket. By late afternoon you reach the hill overlooking the Baron's manor. It's smaller than your own keep, but sturdier looking, with thick walls and a narrow tower. No guards at the gate, no smoke from the chimney, the gate itself is open, not a great sign. Elric dismounts and motions for the rest of you to do the same. You stretch your legs and try not to groan too loudly. Thunderbolt wanders off to chew on someone's discarded flag. You enter the manor cautiously, weapons ready. The air inside is stale, like old soup and mould. Tapestries hang limp on the walls. The great hall is empty. Long tables set but untouched. There's a plate with half a loaf still sitting out. It's gone green. You find the Baron upstairs, well, what's left of him. He's in his bed, surrounded by old linens and the smell of death. His eyes are open, his mouth too, like he was trying to say something when it happened. There's no one else in the room, no attendants, no family. Just a letter on the desk, sealed with wax. Elric opens it, reads it aloud. To the Knights of Black Hollow, if you come too late, know that I fought to protect my people. We fell not by sword, but by silence and breath. I entrust this place to your care. May it fare better than I did. No one speaks for a long time. Here's the scholarly debate you didn't ask for but can't escape now. Were plague deaths treated with the same honour as battlefield deaths? Some say yes. Priests offered last rites. Nobles wrote wills. Chronicles recorded them. Others say no, plague victims were buried en masse, quickly and without ceremony. The truth? Probably both. Depends on who you were, and how many bodies were left. Elric orders the manor searched. Supplies are gathered. Grain, dried meat, salt. You help carry it back to the wagons while the sun begins to dip. You try not to step in anything soft. Before you leave, Elric lights a fire in the hearth. A small gesture. Maybe symbolic. Maybe it's just cold. No. You camp that night on the hillside overlooking the manor. No one talks about what they saw. You chew your rations in silence, eyes on the flickering campfire. The stars come out one by one, like they always do, stubborn and distant. Henrietta curls into your cloak, quiet. Giles sits across from you, arms around his knees, lips pressing thin, and you finally say it. I thought we'd be fighting. He nods. Me too. But there's no one left to fight. Just ghosts. You return to the castle 3 days later with half the provisions you took and twice the nightmares. The wagons rattle emptily behind you, grain sacks thumping, softly with each jolt. And none of you say a word until the castle gates groan open and the portcullis rises like some groggy beast reluctant to welcome anything home. You expect someone to greet you. A stable boy, a guard, even old Tomlin chewing on a twig and muttering about backaches. But there's no one, just the creak of wood, the rustle of wind through the battlements, and the distant sound of clanging from the forge. Steady, rhythmic, almost too normal in the quiet. You'd almost welcome the screech of a goose at this point. Even Henrietta seems unsettled. She rides under your cloak, beak poking out just enough to keep an eye on the courtyard like she's waiting for it to lunge. The castle hasn't changed, not on the surface. The same chipped stones, the same ivy clinging to the walls, the same banners drooping like they've given up pretending to inspire. But the people, fewer, and those still here have that look. You know the one, the sunken eyes, the shuffle in their step like they're walking through fog. You see it in Giles when he steps down from his horse. In Elric, who doesn't even bother to dismount with flair anymore. In yourself, reflected in the basin when you splash your face with rainwater and don't recognise the ghost staring back. You make your report to Sir Bernard, who listens with the stillness of a statue. When you finish, he grunts. Baron died of it. All of them. All but one, Elric says, voice flat. The last man was outside the gate. Bernard nods once. No sympathy, just inventory. Supplies? Enough for 2 weeks, Elric says. Good, might be the difference. He doesn't explain what that means, and you don't ask. Historical fact, because someone has to keep track of reality. Castles were both sanctuaries and prisons during outbreaks. Once you sealed the gates, you sealed your fate. If someone inside got sick, containment became a nightmare. Rooms were blocked off, servants disappeared. Noble families sometimes locked themselves in upper towers and tossed down notes for food, like sick royalty waiting out the end of the world. And here's a wonderfully strange fringe detail. In some plague-afflicted towns, laws were passed requiring people to wear bells around their necks if they felt even slightly ill, like walking alarm systems. You imagine Henrietta in one, she'd probably weaponize the noise. You spend the next day in the armory, reconditioning gear. Not because there's a battle coming, but because it's something to do, something normal. You scrub rust from your sword until the metal gleams. You oil the hinges of your helmet. You even stitch the rip in your jerkin you've ignored for months. You talk with Giles while sharpening arrows. It's slow, quiet conversation, mostly about nothing. Whether birds can get the plague, no one knows. How many rats he's seen in the past week, too many. Whether that patch of mushrooms near the garden wall is edible, definitely not. Then he says it. I think we're cursed. You laugh, but only because it's that or scream. We're squires. That's a curse by itself. No, he says, still focused on his whetstone. I mean, everything. The barony, the sickness, us. It's like we weren't supposed to be here. You want to disagree, but he's not wrong. Nothing feels real anymore. You sleep that night in your usual bunk, but it feels different. Maybe because of the silence, or the space. There used to be 3 beds to your left. Now there's 1, and it's empty. Tomlin's gone, slipped away while you were out on patrol. No fuss, no ceremony, just gone. You think about what he said once, something about how a knight never truly retires, he just becomes part of the stone. You wonder if that's true, if the walls remember, if the floors creak differently now that he's not here to stomp across them. Here's your scholarly debate of the evening. Did knights truly believe in their own legends? The codes, the oaths, the glory? Or did they play the part because the world needed them to, because someone had to ride out when the sky turned dark? Some historians argue that knights were true believers, driven by faith and honour. Others say it was all performance, a role played in armour and blood, with an audience of peasants and priests nodding along. You don't know what you believe anymore. All you know is that people keep dying, and no one's singing about you. The next morning you're called to the Great Hall. Sir Bernard is there. So is Elric. So is Malis, looking even thinner than before, her sleeves pushed up, arms streaked with herbs and soot. And beside them a new face, a messenger, younger than you, fresh-faced, holding a scroll so tight the parchment looks like it might split. He doesn't speak, just hands it over. Bernard reads, then again. Finally, he says, the king has summoned every able-bodied fighter from the region. Something stirs in the east, we don't know what. You stare at him, not sure whether to be afraid or relieved. A battle? Something solid at last? Not plague, not silence, not ghosts. Elric speaks next. It's a week's ride, less if we push, we leave tomorrow. You're not given a choice. Of course not, you're a squire. You belong to the sword and the sword's been drawn and you spend the rest of the day preparing. Again. Only this time you pack with precision. You know what to bring, what to leave. You know what armour will hold and which strap always comes loose. You sharpen your blade like it's your best friend. You sit with Henrietta near the gate as the sun sets, scratching her feathers and pretending not to cry. You're going to war. Or something worse. The next morning you leave at first light. Again. But this time the air carries something different. Not just cold or fog, though both are thick and clinging. It's weight. Heavy, invisible, crushing. You feel it on your chest before you even swing into Thunderbolt's saddle, before the last gate clangs shut behind you and the banner is hoisted. Gold on black today. Not your house's colours, not the barony's. This banner's the king's, stitched in haste and barely dry from the dye. You ride in silence. There's no one to cheer your departure. No servants waving from the ramparts. Just a quiet castle behind you, sealed like a tomb. You'd expect the countryside to be waking up with the sun, but the villages you pass through are eerily still. Windows shuttered, smokeless chimneys. Once, you see a dog watching from the edge of a roof like it climbed up there and forgot why. You see another farm with all its doors open and no one inside. Fields half-harvested, wheat rotting on the stalk. The king's summons didn't just reach your keep, it's pulled men from all over. Along the road you fall in with other small groups, battered squires, grizzled mercenaries, a few knights in rusted plate that might have been white once. No one smiles, no one introduces themselves, everyone looks ahead like they're afraid the road will vanish if they glance sideways. You ride hard, sleep rough, camp under trees that drip all night. You eat what's left in your saddlebag and share what Giles offers from his. Henrietta rides in a burlap sack, poking her head out occasionally to squawk at owls and once a priest. You keep her close, people don't trust animals anymore. Historical fact to anchor you in this bleak march. During times of national crisis, plague, famine, or invasion, medieval monarchs often called levies, summoning every noble house to send troops. Knights, squires, archers, men-at-arms. Refusing a royal summons was a crime, responding meant honour, and often death. The fringe reality. Some towns sent substitutes. Peasants were dressed in borrowed armour, given half a sword and pushed to the front lines. There are stories of lords sending criminals chained together and unchaining them only once the battle started. You try not to think about which version of this you're part of. By the third day the terrain changes. Fewer fields, more hills. Trees, tall and twisted, crowd the path. The light doesn't fall right here. It filters through this canopy in strange streaks, pale and cold. Your horse's hooves make no sound on the mossy road. And then the smell hits. Not strong at first, just wrong. Like rotting herbs and sour milk. You cover your nose, but it doesn't help. Elric rides up, sword half drawn, and raises a fist. Everyone stops. Ahead, the forest opens into a clearing. And there, scattered like broken toys, are the remains of a camp. Tents shredded. A wagon overturned. One horse still tethered, ribs poking through its hide, eyes glassy. And bodies. You dismount slowly, sword in hand. The others do the same. You don't speak. You don't need to. The bodies are knights, or were. Their armour is split in places, crushed. Some have no wounds at all, just looks of terror frozen on their faces. You kneel beside one and touch his gauntlet. The steel is cold, rimed with frost, though the day is warm. "What happened?" Giles whispers. Elric doesn't answer. Just walks to the centre of the clearing and kneels, tracing something in the dirt. A symbol. Circular. Spiked. It looks burned into the ground, not carved, not drawn. Burned! Malis would know what it is, but she's not here. You bury what you can, you say no words, you leave a marker. Then you ride harder than ever, faster than you thought your horse could go. The group thins. One man, an older knight with a hound, vanishes during the night. Another turns back without a word. No one stops him. You don't know if he made it home. By dusk on the fourth day, you reach the king's encampment. It rises from the valley floor like a scar. Tents, wagons, banners snapping in the wind. Fires flickering like scattered stars. Soldiers move through the camp with purpose, though none of them look relaxed. Everyone's too armed for that. Too alert. You're led to the command tent. A squire in royal livery meets you there, mouth thin, eyes sunken. He's younger than you, but somehow looks a decade older. "The king's within," he says. Sir Elric steps forward, beckons you and two others, Giles and a knight named Sir Harwin, to follow. You duck under the flap and step into the warm glow of torches and candlelight. The king is there. He's not what you expect. Younger, hard-eyed, wearing armour so polished it reflects the firelight like water. He doesn't look at you right away. He stares at a map. A massive thing spread across the table, held down by knives. He speaks without turning. "You came from Black Hollow." "Yes, your majesty," Elric says. "Good." He looks up now, eyes sharp. "Then you've seen what we face." You think he means plague, but then he adds, "It's not just sickness anymore. Something else is moving in the east. Something that doesn't bleed. Something that doesn't rot." You swallow hard. The king lifts one of the knives from the map. Its blade is black, charred, like it's been in fire for days. "They've taken 3 villages," he says. "No survivors, no plague, just statements. And then the earth burns." He gestures to a squire who pulls back a flap to reveal a prisoner chained to a post. A knight, or what's left of one. Face scorched, eyes wrong. He grins at you with a mouthful of soot. "Tell them," the king says. The man speaks. His voice is dry leaves in the wind. "We're not the sickness," he says. "We're what comes after." You step back. Even Elric looks shaken. The king sighs, sheathing the blackened blade. "You've ridden through plague and fear," he says. "Now ride through something worse." You leave the tent in silence, head spinning. Giles doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally does, it's barely above a whisper. "I'd rather take my chances with the plague." You don't answer, because he might be right. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're on watch, you aren't, but because sleep feels like a risk you can't afford. You lie in your borrowed tent with your back against your rolled cloak, your sword across your lap, and Henrietta tucked tightly at your side, unusually slunt. Outside, the king's army stirs softly. Fires pop and crackle. Horses shift in their sleep. Now and then someone coughs or mutters in their dreams. You wonder if any of them have seen what you saw in that command tent. What used to be a man, grinning like the fire still lived inside him. The king's words replay again and again in your head. Not just sickness. Something that doesn't bleed. Something that doesn't rot. You're not even sure what that means. But it's worse, because he doesn't seem sure either. And if the king is scared, then what are you supposed to be? At dawn, orders come down. You're to ride with a detachment toward the eastern frontier, where the last village went dark. Not destroyed, not abandoned, just quiet. No messengers, no survivors, not even smoke. The army moves fast, packs light, rides hard, and you're in the third column, somewhere between actual knights and a group of grim-faced mercenaries who smell like pickled death and smile like they've already dug your grave. The countryside changes quickly as you ride. Trees thicken, but not like the pleasant kind that line roads and offer shade. These trees are too tall, too tight, leaning into each other like they're whispering secrets. The birds are gone. You didn't notice until you realized the silence wasn't just from the people. By midday you reach the first of the abandoned outposts, a wooden tower barely standing, moss clinging to its sides like a second skin. The doors are off their hinges. No signs of a fight, no blood, no burned walls, just emptiness. You climb the tower with Giles and look out across the valley. You see the village ahead, nestled among twisted trees, half hidden in fog that shouldn't be this thick in broad daylight. It doesn't look burned, it doesn't look attacked, but something about it curls your gut. You ride in as a group, shields up, swords drawn. No one says a word. The village streets are empty, windows dark, a well in the centre, rope still hanging from the pulley. You dismount with Elric and circle the first few huts. Inside, beds neatly made, plates on tables, tools hung up where they belong, no sign of struggle, but no people. Then you find the ashes. Behind one house, a circle of scorched earth, blackened bones, and the unmistakable smell of charred flesh. Not burned in a fire, burned from the inside out. You gag, hand over your mouth. Giles stumbles back and falls, his boots squelching in something you don't want to look at. Elric kneels by the remains. He doesn't speak for a long time. Finally he says, "This isn't plague." You help set up camp just outside the village. No tents, no fires, just sleeping rolls and sharpened blades. The king has ordered no campfires within 5 miles of the last burned site. He fears it spreads by flame. That night, you take second watch. The fog rolls in thick, making the world feel small. Henrietta sits on your shoulder, feathers bristled, head swivelling like she's keeping watch too. You hear a sound, not a scream, not a howl, a hum, low, vibrating, like a throat humming under a helmet. It pulses through the fog, impossible to place. You grip your sword and scan the dark. Then movement. Not fast, not aggressive, just a shape, human-sized, walking from the village. You call for Elric. He arrives with 2 others, all of you circling as the figure steps closer. You raise a torch and see the face. It's a boy, maybe 14, hair matted, clothes stiff with soot. He smiles. "Too late," he whispers. Then he collapses. Elric rolls him over. No wounds, no heat, no breath. But his eyes, they don't close, they just stare. The king arrives by dawn. He inspects the body, then the ashes, then the strange marks that have begun appearing on the walls of the huts, symbols scratched deep, like someone wanted to carve them into the bones of the village. "They're calling it ember rot," he tells Elric quietly. "Not plague, not magic, something in between." You learn later that the king has summoned mages, real ones, men in robes who speak to bones and whisper to stars. They arrive with books chained to their waists and bags that smell like crushed cinders. They don't smile. They don't ask your name. They burn the boy's body without a word. Historical fact for the road. In the darker corners of the Middle Ages, when reason failed and death became too frequent, people turned to anything. Science, superstition, sorcery. There are documented cases of village councils hiring supposed sorcerers to cleanse those areas of death. Sometimes it meant rituals, sometimes it meant mass burnings, sometimes it meant exile. And the fringe bit? There are records, rare, disputed, of diseases no one could explain. Accounts of people burning from within, of skin blackening in spirals, of ash falling without smoke. Scholars argue over these stories. Were they metaphor, exaggeration, or something that really walked through the woods when the night grew too still? You don't care what they call it. You've seen it. You sleep that night with your sword on your chest and Henrietta perched on your helmet. Neither of you rest easy. Tomorrow you ride east again, toward more silence, more fog, more bones. You're not a knight, not yet, but what's out there doesn't seem to care.